My great kingdom of Italy. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 126. Prepare to show off your muscles. What are you doing? Why are you provoking Abyssinians again? Holding Major General Bart's report on the loss of Adequera in Eritrea. Carlo made some inner thoughts. Of course, the report that Carlo read must be that Abyssinia provoked Italy in every possible way, and the Italian army must have performed its duties faithfully, but it suffered a 100-fold siege from the Abyssinians, which led to its failure. Carlo took a cursory look at this report, and it was pretty much what he thought. Of course, the actual situation may be the other way around, unless the Abyssinians are crazy and will deliberately provoke Italy. However, Carlo would not say these thoughts out loud because the Minister of Navy and Army was right in front of him, and the Prime Minister was also there. How could he demolish the army at this time? As a qualified political figure, Carlo would not do such an unwise act. What is your military's opinion on this? Putting down the telegram in his hand, Carlo looked at the two military bosses, mainly at the Secretary of War, General Saragut. Facing Carlo's inquiry, Admiral Saragut, who looked indignant, immediately spoke in his angry voice. This is a provocation by the Abyssinians against the Kingdom of Italy. This is an act of war, and must be dealt with civilly. Regarding Admiral Saragut's words, Carlo then turned his attention to the other two. A blow must be given. These other words of Admiral Garlock, Minister of the Navy. The Abyssinians should be taught a lesson. This is what Prime Minister Despotis said. Seeing the surprising unity between the military and the political parties, Carlo felt entangled in his heart. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for him to oppose the unanimous opinion of the military and the government. Contrary to the opinions of the military administration, he was actually not willing to take action against the Abyssinians. This was not because he was afraid of these black uncles in East Africa. Although he had won a victory over the Italian army in history, it was only in Italy that he defeated the Italian army. Completed without paying enough attention. 200,000 to 17,000, and it was still in an ambush. Such a failure was not that embarrassing. I didn't see that even the British could lose their wings in the hands of the Afghans. And twice. The main reason for Carlo's reluctance is that the Ethiopian plateau is too barren, with neither enough arable land nor any minerals. It is not worthwhile to use force against such a place. If it were as rich as Sudan and had so many resources, Carlo would definitely push Italy to take action against it, let alone military and political opinions. However, taking into account the opinions of both the military and the political parties, and the fact that this was the behavior of the army of Emperor Johannes IV of Abyssinia, it meant that it at least had the acquiescence of the Black Emperor in this case. If Italy does not come back with revenge, the people alone will not be able to give an explanation. Moreover, Carlo started his career by opposing France. If he did not show a tough attitude, he would easily lose his prestige. So he had to make a statement. This could be considered a kidnapping point. When it came to selecting his opponents, Carlo was very cautious, because if Italy wanted to accumulate prestige and show strength, it also needed the support of its opponents. As for right or wrong and the reason, it no longer matters. In this era, the big fist is the truth. In this respect, Carlo has perfectly integrated into this era. So, what are your military plans? Carlo's words made the two military bosses feel secretly happy. You must know that the previous order not to cross the border of the Abyssinian Empire was what Carlo strongly requested. Although they don't know why, both admirals can feel that His Majesty does not want to conflict with them. And now that His Majesty has personally said that he allows the military to take action against him, how can he not make the two generals happy? Of course, the main reason is that General Saragut is more happy. After all, this will be led by the army. Your Majesty, our military's plan is to deploy one brigade each from the 9th Division and the 12th Division, totaling 10,000 people, to reinforce Eritrea. In this way, we will have 14,000 troops in Eritrea, which is enough to fight against Abyssinia. The Asian Empire starts a war. At the same time, we also need to choose a successor within it. After we defeat the army of Johannes IV, we need a new emperor who will fall to us and control Abyssinia for us. Carlo felt speechless when he heard General Saragut speak about the military's plan. This was comparing the Abyssinians to the scattered primitive African tribes. Although such an army is large enough for other parts of Africa, it is not enough to deal with Abyssinia, a brave and fighting East African feudal empire. So, after listening to the Minister of War's plan, Carlo shook his head and said, "This plan does not have enough troops." Carlo's words made the two admirals look like questions. This is data they obtained by referring to the results of previous battles, as well as the military forces used by Britain and France during their colonization, and also taking into account the strength of Johannes IV, the Abyssinian emperor. Although the Abyssinian Empire has more than 200,000 troops, the army under the command of the emperor is only about 120,000. The force of 1:9 is enough to deal with the emperor of the East African Empire. Carlo gave reasons why he thought it was not enough. Because we can't just consider the army of Johannes IV. We must know that we are launching a war against Abyssinia. This emperor has enough righteousness, so he is very likely to get support from other forces. So I think such a force is too small. At least 40,000 are needed. In addition, Abyssinia has a conflict with the Mahdi forces in Sudan, and we should also take advantage of it. Yes, what Carlo wanted was to use a huge force and foreign aid to defeat the Abyssinians with all their might. He very much recognized the words of Mengtezu Zhu Yuantang. Either don't do it, or do it absolutely. I think it's too labor intensive. However, as soon as Carlo finished speaking, there was immediate opposition, and everyone saw that it was the Prime Minister who was making a statement. Faced with everyone's gaze, Prime Minister Despotis stated the reasons for his opposition. This is too expensive and the government simply doesn't have that much money. After working on it for a long time, we still had trouble due to lack of money. Facing the Prime Minister's words, Carlo asked, how much money can the government currently spend on military spending at present? In addition to the 80 million lire reserve fund, the government can allocate up to 30 million lire. After hearing the Prime Minister's words, General Saragut, who is the Minister of War, continued, if it is based on His Majesty's request to send troops, then the cost of sending troops to Abyssinia this time should be around 80 million to 110 million lire. This is calculated based on limiting the wartime to 3 months. If it is extended by 1 month, the cost will also increase by about 20 million. It is true that the sound of a cannon is worth 10,000 taels of gold. Once there is a war, this money will be spent like water, of course. Admiral Saragut said this to dispel Carlo's idea of mobilizing troops in such a way. But he didn't know that Carlo was determined to promote this plan. Then, issue war bonds. The government will immediately issue a special war bond of 200 million liras. Carlo's words immediately silenced the two military bosses. Since fees are the issue, then of course they have nothing to say now that Carlo is preparing to issue bonds as a reason point. But for the Prime Minister, these words made him feel crazy. The fiscal revenue that had finally improved slightly was going to be dragged down by this bond again. But seeing Carlo staring at him, he couldn't say anything to object. This was considered acquiescence. Now that the military expenditure problem has been solved, the next step will be easier. Carlo took into account the actual situation of the army and the terrain of Abyssinia, and he gave special instructions to the Minister of War for this purpose. The troops deployed are mainly mountain troops. In addition, the guards will also send 2 regiments to participate in this punitive war against Abyssinia. Yes, Carlo also needs to let the guards go to the battlefield to practice. Now that they have decided to send troops, the two military bosses need to rush back to prepare, make plans, mobilize the troops, and supply transportation, etc. need to be redone. They are busy. As for the Prime Minister, he is also busy. In addition to issuing war bonds, he also needs to negotiate with other countries to understand Italy's disciplinary war against Abyssinia. Otherwise, those countries would make small moves in private, which would make it more difficult for Italian soldiers to fight. After Carlo sent away the 3 military and political leaders, he was just about to continue working when he received a report from the guard. Your Majesty, His Excellency Fulham, the British ambassador, asks for an audience. Chapter 4. I'm exhausted. I've drank 5 cans of Red Bull. Could you please give me a recommendation vote? Chapter 127. This is an act of war. Please vote, collect, and ask for everything. I don't know what your excellency, Ambassador Fulham, is doing with this visit. In the office, Carlo looked at the British ambassador in front of him with a smile on his face and asked what he wanted, point facing the prosperous British. Carlo, as the king, had to put on a friendly expression. There is no way. The British are so powerful now, no one dares to ignore their existence, point especially for the current Italy. It cannot afford to offend. Among other things, as long as the Suez Canal is closed to Italy, its army preparing to expedition to Abyssinia will need to take a boat around Africa. Those 200 million lire war bonds cannot last even 2 months. Facing the polite Carlo, Ambassador Fulham would not look down upon him at all. He had served as ambassador in Rome for 3 years and had a full understanding of the king's abilities and knew that he was not as kind as he appeared. Point. But this time he really came to visit for business, I saw him saying with a smile on his face. Your Majesty Carlo, I come this time with goodwill, Ambassador. Fulham's words made Carlo feel a shadow in his heart. The ambassador was so polite, which meant that his visit was definitely not simple. Oh, I wonder what kind of goodwill can make the ambassador come in person. Sure enough, following Fulham's words, Carlo immediately felt something unusual. Your Majesty Carlo, this time I brought the goodwill of Emperor Johannes IV of Abyssinia. He is willing to make a gesture of goodwill to avoid such disputes from continuing to occur. How could Carlo not understand at this time that Ambassador Fulham, or the British behind him, wanted to be a peacemaker? And Carlo's expression immediately darkened. The dispute between our country and the Abyssinian Empire cannot be resolved with just one sentence. Faced with Carlo's gloomy expression, Fulham completely ignored it and continued. Your Majesty Carlo, it is better to listen to the kindness of Johannes IV, considering the importance of the British. Carlo could only listen to what the ambassador had to say. His Majesty Carlo, Emperor Johannes IV of Abyssinia, expressed regret for the conflict between the two countries in Adi-Quera. In order to achieve peaceful coexistence between the two countries, Johannes IV decided to withdraw the army 30 kilometers to avoid let the misunderstanding between the two countries continue. For the Italian officers and soldiers who suffered losses in this conflict, Johannes IV gave £120,000 as financial compensation. In addition, Johannes IV decided to hand over Dalal to your country for management. After Ambassador Fulham finished speaking, Carlo looked at him. Are there no other terms? No more at the moment, but we can discuss it again if we are not satisfied. It's this land cession, less than 5,000 square kilometers, and compensation, only £120,000. Over. In this case, Carlo expressed his opinion. I have only 2 conditions. First, Johannes IV comes to Rome in person to apologize to the families of the murdered officers and soldiers. Second, the Abyssinian Empire exempts Italian goods from taxes. After hearing Carlo say these 2 things, Fulham immediately knew that this condition was impossible to negotiate, because the first one is to completely throw the face of Emperor Johannes IV to the ground. If he comes from Rome to apologize in person, then the position of emperor that he finally won will also be lost. Point. As for the second item, it is even more impossible. It is treating Abyssinia as a dumping ground for Italian goods. Who can accept this? However, Fulham still refused to give up, because it was London's order to avoid war between the two countries, which was related to Britain's layout in Africa. For the British who were driven out of Sudan, Sudan was in their pocket, and they did not want to see Italy occupying Abyssinia and peeking at Sudan. Your Majesty Carlo, these 2 items are too harsh. Can you reconsider it? Facing the British ambassador's words, Carlo said without hesitation, this is the biggest concession I can see your country can give in terms of face. If I change my previous idea, our country hopes to bring Johannes IV to Rome for trial. Now, Ambassador Fulham knew what the Italians were thinking, and he had no intention of negotiating peace with Abyssinia. It is very regrettable that this will bring disaster to both countries. Faced with the change in Ambassador Fulham's tone, Carlo responded without any sign of weakness. if this were to happen to the British Empire, please tell me what your country's decision would be. These are two different things and cannot be confused. Faced with Ambassador Fulham's double standard performance, Carlo couldn't help but ask, I don't know if this visit is your government's idea or the ambassador's idea. Faced with Carlo's inquiry, Ambassador Fulham spoke, this is my idea. At the same time, our government is also willing to let your country and Abyssinia resolve disputes based on the principle of peace. Ambassador Fulham's words mean that Britain will not openly embarrass Italy as long as this is enough. Thank you, Ambassador, for your kindness, but the gap between our country and Abyssinia is too big, and it is difficult to negotiate. Carlo's words represented Italy's rejection of British mediation. That's a shame, since there was no agreement, there was nothing more to say, and Ambassador Fulham then left the palace point after the British ambassador left. Carlo called the captain of the guard over, send a message to the military, and ask them to make another plan, because Britain and France are very likely to provide military assistance to Abyssinia. After hearing this, Felicity knew the seriousness of the matter and immediately answered, I'll arrange someone right now, or I'll send the news to the military myself. Although Carlo's words were vague, he was sure that these two countries would definitely make small moves behind the scenes. Britain is because of the Sudan, and France is needless to say. How can the Paris government forget Italy's performance in the Sino-French War? After Carlo informed the military of his judgment, the original plan was immediately overturned because he was worried about the small actions of Britain and France. This time the military showed a rare act of generosity and made a big move. The Third Army, which is stationed in the Alps all year round, is one of the core units of Italy's defense against France. This war against Abyssinia will be based on this army. In addition, the 3rd Mountain Brigade, the 6th Mountain Brigade, the 7th Artillery Regiment, and the 1st Division of the 6th Division were added, plus the 2 regiments of the Guards, making the overall picture of the Abyssinian War. The number of troops is as high as 53,000. Of course, transporting these troops to the Eritrean front line will take time. Not to mention anything else, the amount of transportation of weapons and ammunition alone is astonishing. The military set up a temporary transportation department specifically for this purpose. To manage all this, of course, Britain and France informed the Abyssinian Emperor Johannes IV of the general actions of Italy through various channels, knowing that he had stabbed the Black Emperor. Of course he would not sit still and wait to die. So the cloud of war enveloped the land of East Africa. Chapter 5. Continue typing. There are 2 chapters left today. I vomited 3 liters of blood. Continue typing. Chapter 128. The preparations of the Abyssinians. Dis, located in Amhara, was the capital determined by the Abyssinian Emperor Johannes IV. In this Abyssinian capital, the majestic Sobia Palace was the Abyssinian capital, the residence of the Lord of Xenia. But today, His Majesty the Emperor was not in a good mood, because the news brought by the British made him very angry. These damn Italians. I have put aside my noble status and bowed my head to admit my mistake. They still want to arrest me and take me to Rome for trial. Do they think I'm easy to bully? The roar of Johannes IV put everyone in the palace in danger. His Majesty the Emperor had a bad temper recently, and several servants were thrown to the lions for offending him. It seems that the British failed to reach peace talks and immediately added fuel and jealousy to make the relationship between the two countries even worse. Your Majesty, this may be because those Italians are too greedy. We may be able to put forward higher conditions. Prime Minister Matthias on the side spoke out new ideas. It was a good thing that the Prime Minister did not speak, but when he did, he was immediately reprimanded by Johannes IV. If it weren't for your suggestion, how could I have been humiliated in front of the Italians? These Italians have invaded Tigray, and they simply ignore me as an emperor in their eyes. Everyone in the court knew the importance the emperor attached to Tigray, where he started his career. Later, he used this place as a basis to fight everywhere, and unified Abyssinia after the death of Tewodros II. It can be said that Tigray holds an extraordinary weight in his heart. Otherwise, when the Italians invaded here, they would not have hinted that the garrison would wipe out this bold little Italian force. The angry curse of Johannes IV made Prime Minister Matthias unable to speak. In Abyssinia, the emperor has all the power, and his prime minister is more of a butler. Although he believed that Abyssinia could not compete with Italy on its own strength, no one could persuade the angry emperor. It cannot be said that no one can persuade him, and he can still listen to the words of Menelik II, the son-in-law who ruled Shoa, because this is his chosen successor. The Lord of Shoa was no ordinary person. He was originally imprisoned by the former emperor Tuadris II. Later, when the British invaded, he took the opportunity to escape and returned to Shoa Point after Tuadris II was defeated and committed suicide. Menelik II took the opportunity to expand his territory, and later became a situation where he and Johannes IV were competing for supremacy. However, Menelik, who lacked foreign support, gradually became at a disadvantage in the battle with Johannes IV. In order to resolve the struggle between the two powers, the held peace talks. The result of the peace talks was that Menelik married Princess Tatu, the daughter of Johannes IV, and his 10-year-old daughter Zodatu from his ex-wife was betrothed to Johannes' son Elias Selassie. The relationship is very messy, and there are child marriages. In addition, as a condition for Menelik's surrender, the throne of Hans IV will be inherited by Menelik. It can be said that this is the result of the combination of the two powers, but unfortunately, this Menelik is still in Shoa, not in the capital Point. After venting for a while, Hans IV's anger was almost gone. He glanced at the prime minister who was standing silently aside, and then gave instructions to a servant. Send someone to Hayek to bring Selassie back. Selassie is his son, Duke Elias Selassie. Hayek, where he is located, is 15 kilometers away from the capital. One of the most trusted troops of Hans IV is stationed here. Father, you called me, Duke. Selassie, who was in his early 30s, had a dusty look on his face, and he started asking questions as soon as he entered the door. Yes, we are going to fight again, this time facing his son. Johannes IV said something surprising. As soon as he opened his mouth, Duke Selassie is indeed his son, and he is of the same blood. Who shall we fight this time? Italian. Then, Johannes IV informed his son of the news brought by the British. These Italians are so unreasonable. I can smell their ambitions for our country from thousands of kilometers away. Duke Selassie, who looked disgusted, also disliked Italians for the same reason. By the way, have you put away the weapons I asked you to store? It has been put away. Father can send someone to receive it at any time. Faced with his father's question, Duke Selassie gave the answer. The arms they mentioned were brought by British and French traders during this period. The price was much cheaper than before, and Hans IV took this opportunity to make a big purchase. Of course, he also knew that if it weren't for the intrigue among these Europeans, how could he get an advantage? But even if he picked up a bargain, these more than 10,000 muzzle-loading guns, 5,000 breech-loading guns, and 60 artillery pieces still left him with more than half of his wallet empty. No way. Abyssinia itself is not rich, and the area where it can collect taxes only occupies half of Abyssinia. However, there is still good news. That is, considering that the funds may be insufficient, the British and French businessmen agreed to pay in goods. Abyssinia mainly produces cattle, sheep, camels and leather products, as well as some agricultural products such as coffee and cat grass. However, given the barren land of Abyssinia, the output is not high. But this time, given the strength of the Italians, Johannes IV was also bold. He also ordered a large number of arms from Britain and France, including 30,000 front-loading guns, 12,000 breech-loading guns, and 120 artillery pieces, and requested that they be delivered within 2 months. Faced with the Abyssinian emperor's request, both British and French businessmen said that they would definitely deliver it before the war. In order to raise funds, Johannes IV even confiscated a large number of livestock to pay for arms. It is unrealistic to defeat the Italians just relying on their own strength. Therefore, the Prime Minister also has a role to play. He is going to let him draft a document to call on the people to resist the Italian invasion. In addition, the warlords and lords in the country have not been left behind. They have sent special envoys and asked them to prepare troops and follow the emperor to resist the Italian invasion. Attack. Johannes IV used these methods very smoothly. In the face of national justice, no one dared to stand up and object. As for personal inner thoughts, only you know that point. This series of tactics by Johannes IV immediately caused excitement in Abyssinia, and countless people enthusiastically joined the emperor's army. This caused Johannes IV's army to expand rapidly like a balloon. Point in just over a month, the number of people increased from more than 20,000 to 80,000. Coupled with various warlords, Abyssinia's national military strength quickly expanded to 140,000. However, nearly half of them are new recruits. I just don't know. Will the Italian army give them a chance to adapt? I can't bear it anymore, so I'll go to bed first and make up for it tomorrow. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129 Remarks on the launch. Please read it. It will be on the shelves tomorrow, and in accordance with international practice, the Steamed Buns will also give a review for the launch. Point. Let's talk about my writing experience first. Point. This is Mantao's second book. Although I can't say how well written it is, Mantao has tried his best. I also want to write more exciting and fascinating things, but Mantao's writing power is limited and can only reach this level. Of course, the problem lies with Mantao. After all, it is Mantao's responsibility to make readers happy. Point. In addition, let me talk about the update issues that everyone is concerned about. I will update it twice a day after it is put on the shelves. If something happens, I will write a request for leave. In addition, there is the issue of additional updates. Because Steamed Buns is a part-time job, there may be very few additional updates. Let's set a rule here. A reward of 200 yuan will be added to Steamed Buns by adding a chapter, and there is no upper limit. In addition, every time there are 100 more monthly tickets, the Steamed Buns will also be added. After all, a handicapped author who can write 3 chapters a day still needs to stay up until 1 or 2 in the morning. Everyone, please understand the hard work of part-time authors. This is also the limit of Steamed Buns. I also know that many old readers will sneer at this. Can you believe your Steamed Buns guarantee? This time the Steamed Buns are really guaranteed to be updated at least twice a day. Point. We use this as evidence to monitor whether the Steamed Buns can be made. Point. Finally, as usual, please subscribe. Point. I know that as the book is put on the shelves, many readers will turn to pirated copies. I don't blame you. It's because Mantao's writing is not exciting enough, which makes you feel that it is not worth reading my genuine book. Point. Here, Steamed Bun would like to ask, could you please subscribe to a few chapters for the sake of Steamed Bun's hard work for 3 months, and treat Steamed Bun to drink a bottle of water in recognition of your hard work. The first order is really important to Mantao, which is related to the confidence of Mantao in writing. If the first order is high, Mantao will be able to break out a few more chapters, making everyone happy. Point. Is it okay? I have finished writing my thanks for being put on the shelves, but the Steamed Buns need to be coded. There are still 4 chapters left today, and they need to be updated when they are released tomorrow. Sudan, you are really not a human being, and you have harmed me. Chapter 130 Foreign Aid. The Abyssinians are on the move, and Italy is not stupid, so how could it not be indifferent to this? Don't think that the Abyssinians are so united. There are always some people who want to bring down the emperor through the hands of the Italians. Therefore, not only did Italy know that Johannes IV was mobilizing for war, but Britain and France, who were behind the scenes, were also well aware of it. Point. It's rude to come back without reciprocating, and Italy will naturally not be polite, and has countermeasures. Today's Sudan is full of joy after independence. Although the savior who led them to independence, the Mahdi, has returned to the embrace of God, the Sudan he created still stands on the land of Africa. Omdurman, located in the middle reaches of the Nile River, was the capital chosen by the Mahdi himself. In order to distinguish himself from the previous British, the founder of Sudan did not choose Khartoum as the successor after the death of Mahdi. Caliph Abdullah was extremely busy. After the founding of Sudan, its country was in dire straits due to the previous oppression by Egypt and the British. Moreover, Mahdi's sudden death caused a split in the Sudanese leadership that had united around him. They were divided into 3 parts, with the 3 caliphs Abdullah, Sharif and Ali as leaders among them. Abdullah has the most power. and this Abdullah was also capable. Within a year, he defeated the other two caliphs one after another, making him the only caliph of the Sultanate. Now, except for the secret objections of a few people, Abdullah can be said to have monopolized power today. The ruler of Sudan is meeting with an envoy from Italy. "Hello, Mr. Perez." Abdullah shook hands with the visitor in a very Western style. "Hello, Your Majesty the Caliph." Perez's attitude satisfied Abdullah, which meant that the newly established Sudan was recognized by other countries. "We are very clear about the purpose of your visit this time, but why should we help you? You must know that if you occupy Abyssinia, you will not be our neighbors. How can we trust you then? No, like other Europeans, they will have ambitions for us." Abdullah spoke very directly, so directly that envoy Perez was a little surprised. However, since he was from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Perez was not surprised by Abdullah's words. "Your Majesty the Caliph, we understand your concerns very much. However, I remember there is a proverb in your country that lions will not be friends with sheep." This sentence is also very suitable for the current situation between you and us. Listening to Envoy Perez's words, Abdullah stared at him. "So who do you think is the lion, and who is the sheep?" "We in Italy are lions, but your country is not a sheep. It can be regarded as a jackal." The explanation Perez gave made Abdullah laugh. "Does Your Excellency the Special Envoy think that you can impress me with this proverb?" "Of course not. This is just to give His Excellency the Caliph a clear understanding of his own strength." Confronted with the Sudanese Caliph, Perez continued his rhetoric. "As far as I know, your country also has a lot of disputes with Abyssinia. Uniting with our country can help your country take back those areas occupied by Abyssinia." The occupied areas Perez mentioned were Binas in the western part of the plateau and the Sami Valley in Kasoni. The Blue Nile and Lake Tana make these two areas lush with water and grass. From ancient times to the present, whether the Abyssinian tribes went west or the Nubians, ancient Sudanese, went east, they must pass through here. In addition, there are religious factors. Abyssinia believes in Orthodox Christianity, while Sudan believes in Green Christianity. These two major religions have been at loggerheads for nearly 1,000 years. Territory and religion have made the relationship between the two countries extremely bad. Therefore, these two places can be said to be the testicles of the two countries, and they will explode if they touch each other. But now that these two areas are occupied by Abyssinia, it would be impossible for the Sudanese people to do so without any ideas. Perez's words made Abdullah feel a little moved, but it was only limited to his heartbeat. If he couldn't figure out what the Italians really thought, he wouldn't be able to join the war against Abyssinia. "How do I know that this won't be a poisonous apple with a charming smell?" Faced with Abdullah's question, Perez spread his hands. "I can't give you a guarantee on this, because all the guarantees I give need to be based on the fact that there is not a big gap in strength between the two parties. But I can give you some news." Perez's last words piqued the Sultan's Caliph's interest. "Oh, let's hear some news." "In preparation for this military operation in Abyssinia, we discovered that the British were behind this evil regime." Seeing Perez mention the British, Abdullah frowned. Who he and the Sudanese senior officials are most worried about is the British. Although he has never heard the saying that the enemy of his enemy is his friend, he has heard a lot of proverbs with similar meanings as for how to judge. This needs to test the Caliph's judgment. The Caliph remained motionless, pondering the pros and cons, while Perez waited quietly, and the room fell silent for a moment. After a long time, the Caliph spoke. "If our country is willing to attack Abyssinia with your country, then in addition to Binas and Samia, we need compensation." Thinking that the Sudanese ruler wanted the lion to open its mouth, Perez had to give him a warning. "Your Excellency, ambition requires matching strength, otherwise it will only bring unnecessary disaster to yourself." "Don't worry, I'm conscious." Faced with Perez's warning, Abdullah knew what he wanted. "Our request is that in addition to the above two territories, your country needs to provide us with 3,000 standard breech loading guns of your country. In addition, our country also needs Abyssinian equipment seized in combat. It will be divided into half, and our country has the right of first refusal on the other half." Yes, Abdullah was very sober, and knew how to maximize Sudan's interests in this battle. In addition to territory, he also considered increasing his strength. Those Abyssinian equipment must be looked down upon by the Italians, so they just put forward this condition, which is suitable for their own use. Faced with Abdullah's request, Perez did not consider it at all and said directly, "This is no problem, I can promise you." Next, let's discuss the issue of sending troops from your country. In addition to the foreign aid of the Sudan, Italy also tried to divide the noble princes of Abyssinia. As the strongest man besides Emperor Johannes IV, Menelik II also sent people to contact Italy. "I'm sorry, I will not betray the emperor. You should give up." Looking at the visiting guests, Menelik II rejected Italy's wooing with righteous words. "Your Excellency, don't think about it again. Our country is willing to see people like you become the new masters of Abyssinia. I won't do this." That's it. After a few words, the visiting guests were asked out. But the guest was not angry at all, because Sheoe met him secretly and did not alert others. This is enough to illustrate the problem. Menelik II may not be willing to face his father-in-law directly. Of course, his thoughts were nothing among the people contacted by Italy this time. This was the general attitude of the Abyssinian princes, who were unwilling to make premature bets. But when the situation becomes clearer, the conditions will not be as generous as they are now. I'm also surprised that Romania is gone, and I don't know any more about the reasons than you do. Chapter 131 Difficulties. Asmara is the center of Italian rule in Eritrea. It is connected to Massawa, Italy's most important port in the region, to Abyssinia, and to Khartoum. All of this, the advantages have made Asmara prosperous, and the pleasant climate here has made many people fall in love with Asmara. However, among these people, the new commander-in-chief of the Italian Expeditionary Force, Lieutenant General Pablo Simeon, is definitely not one of them. Bang! There was a loud push on the door, startling the officers at the Expeditionary Force headquarters in the south of the city. But then Lieutenant General Simeon, who was dusty and angry, walked in, and these officers immediately turned into birds and beasts. Lieutenant General Simeon was originally the commander of the Third Army. After the establishment of the Expeditionary Force, among the several commanders selected by the military, Carlo took a look and supported him to become the commander of the Expeditionary Force. The reason why Carlo took a fancy to him is simple. Simeon has great military exploits on his resume. He made very good contributions in the Second and Third Wars. Of course, this was not the reason why Carlo chose him. What attracted Carlo was that the commander of the Third Army did not participate in social gatherings with other officers on weekdays, and he had little interest in politics. He just liked it when he had nothing to do. Consider the latest European military developments. Moreover, the Third Army led by him has ranked among the best in many exercises. Such an unsociable and capable senior general seemed to Carlo to have found a treasure, and of course he was willing to help. For this reason, he even quarreled with the Minister of War. The Secretary of War recommended General Rafael Cardona, who was famous in the Unification War, but in the end he could not overcome the king's persistence, and in the end the candidate for commander fell on the young Simeon. The 52-year-old lieutenant general can be considered young and powerful in the Italian army. After Simeon obtained the position of commander of the Expeditionary Force, he did not leave with the army. He first met with Carlo, listened to his suggestions, and rushed to Asmara as quickly as possible to establish his own command department. It can be said that it is vigorous and resolute. Therefore, Lieutenant General Simeon began to perform his duties as commander before most of the Expeditionary Force arrived. Of course, Simeon is definitely not someone who sits in command, listens to reports from his subordinates, and then issues orders. Less than half a month after arriving in Asmara, in addition to inspecting various military facilities, he also visited the front line with Abyssinia. This time he had just returned from the front line, and it seemed that the inspection situation was not optimistic. Lieutenant General Simeon did not have these officers at all. He returned to his office on the second floor with a sullen face and full of anger almost immediately. Major General Bartlett, Chief of Staff of the Expeditionary Force, rushed to his office. Major General Bartlett, from the Army staff, was able to become the Chief of Staff of the Expeditionary Force this time. In addition to his ability, he was also directly related to his close relationship with the Secretary of the Army. One more thing to say here is that many army generals considered a formation of this expeditionary force to be a rare opportunity to gain military merit, so a large number of their descendants and young officers were stuffed in. Faced with this situation, not to mention the Minister of War, not even Carlo could directly refuse. Of course, how to get these meritorious children to get tasks that can not only gain military exploits, but also ensure safety will need to test Simeon's political wisdom. The most Carlo can do is give him a hand, but it is impossible to protect him. After all, Lieutenant General Simeon has been in the army for nearly 30 years, so he should know what to do. Seeing Simone's angry look on his face, Bartlett asked, "Why are you so angry?" Faced with the inquiry from the chief of staff who he didn't get along with very often, Simeon certainly wouldn't look down on him. He said with a helpless expression, "Who else could it be? Major General Bart's previous report is completely inconsistent with the actual situation. They were all soldiers." Of course, Bartlett knew the consequences of discrepancies between the actual situation and the report, so he asked with a serious expression, "What's happening here? Didn't I go to the front line before? I just discovered that the supplies in the report were 30% less, and the number of mules, horses, camels and other livestock prepared was also wrong. When I asked the local garrison, they told me that it was because the livestock had died of illness before. What kind of disease can cause the death of more than 30,000 livestock and still dare not report it? I think someone is too greedy." Faced with Simeon's words, Bartlett immediately felt the seriousness of the matter. The local garrison was definitely involved and wanted to bring its commander under control. "I have done this a long time ago. I have Lieutenant Colonel Kiesis under the control of the military police." After replying, Simeon said with a mocking look, "Do you believe that a lieutenant colonel alone can embezzle so much material?" Bartlett has also been in the military for many years, and of course he knows that a lieutenant colonel cannot be so bold. He had heard that corruption in overseas troops was serious before, but he didn't expect them to be so greedy. Was he blinded? We can't touch him now. Everything is important to prepare for war. As for the chief of staff, Simeon certainly knows that now is not the time to attack these moths. If he attacks these moths while preparing for war, it will prolong the preparation time. He will not do such uncertain things. Otherwise, the big guys from both the military and the government would definitely want him to look good. Although they have decided to postpone the treatment of the moths, the supplies of the expeditionary force must not pass through their hands. As you go to the front this time, how is the situation in the army? Faced with the words of the chief of staff, Simeon shook his head and said, "The situation is not ideal. Compared with the domestic troops, both the spirit and daily training are far behind. In this battle, these colonial troops can only be responsible for logistics and transportation. But when it comes to transportation, Simeon thinks of the road conditions he saw on the front line. In addition, send a telegram to Rome. We need 2 regiments of engineers. The road is less than ideal." Facing the chief of staff's words, Simeon sighed. "It's not just unsatisfactory, it's simply terrible. After Mendefra, the road's traffic capacity is so bad that it can't bear heavy carriages at all. And when it reaches Adiquera, ordinary carriages can't move forward either. I want to continue. To move forward, we must rely on animal power. According to the previously prepared plan, such a transportation line cannot support an army of no more than 20,000. Simone's words made Bartlett's face change greatly. "This is not about changing plans. It must be so. I intend to inform Rome of the actual situation here. We need more livestock and more road construction tools." Well, before the war even started, Simone, as the commander, planned to turn his soldiers into road construction workers. Can the superiors agree to this? Anyway, after telling them the actual situation, we have no better way. This is the 30th, and I haven't written anything about National Day today. Chapter 132. There are always more solutions than difficulties. First order requested. The 2 expedition commanders jointly sent a telegram to let Rome's military and political bosses know of their actual difficulties faced with their difficulties. The person who cared most about them was Carlo. So when he learned of the expeditionary force's difficulties, he immediately summoned military and political leaders for a meeting. Everyone has seen the difficulties faced by the expeditionary force. How should we solve them? From the beginning, Carlo expressed his opinion. This is very rare, because he usually waits for others to speak before he expresses his opinion. This also shows that Carlo attaches great importance to this expedition to Abyssinia. It's impossible not to take this seriously. You must know that Carlo relied on his past life memories before, but this expedition to Abyssinia was the first time he took the initiative to change. Is this the same? Forcing the Netherlands to abandon Landfang did not go through a war, so it does not count. The important ministers all felt this, and they were a little surprised why the king paid so little attention to small Abyssinia. But since the king asked, they needed to provide a solution. Our government can immediately purchase a batch of livestock and send it to the expeditionary force. We can also ask the diplomatic missions in East Africa and Egypt to arrange for people to purchase a batch of livestock. In addition, we can also pay a special fee to purchase it locally. As for the road construction equipment it needs, we can also purchase a batch immediately. Prime Minister Depretis' words made Carlo look at him with approval. Although I have not had a good experience with this prime minister before, he is still capable. After the prime minister finished speaking, the war secretary was not far behind. Your Majesty, our army will immediately arrange 2 regiments of engineers to rush to Eritrea urgently, and we will not let its preparation time delay too long. Since the Prime Minister and the Minister of War have spoken, Admiral Garlock, as Minister of the Navy, naturally also needs to express his position. Our Navy will arrange additional ships to transport urgently needed supplies for the Engineer Corps and the Expeditionary Force. The full cooperation between the military and the government did not disappoint Carlo. Subsequently, the government purchased a large number of donkeys, horses, mules and other livestock, and also urgently purchased a batch of road construction tools. The army even mobilized 2 engineering regiments and rushed to Eritrea. The Navy's transport ship has already been arranged to the port, and after these engineers get on the ship, they will be shipped to Eritrea immediately. Rome's actions are not unpleasant. Of course, Simonsi and other expedition commanders are not just waiting for these supplies. They arranged for the troops that had arrived in Eritrea to start preliminary construction work. Clang, an eagle's pick hit a stone, causing white marks to appear on the stone. Berry put down the eagle chisel in his hand, wiped the sweat from his face, looked at his friend who was also wielding the chisel, and gasped. Captain Cossens, aren't you tired? Cossens, who also had sweat streaming down his face, answered without looking back. Tired? Since you are tired, why don't you take a break and let everyone take a break? Looking up at the tired officers and soldiers, Cossens put down the chisel in his hand and shouted, "Rest for 15 minutes first." Following Cossens's words, the soldiers responsible for the expansion on both sides of the road immediately put down their tools and gathered together in 2s and 3s to rest. Some were smoking, some were drinking water, and some took the opportunity to find a place under the shade of a tree to lie down for a while. This did not look like they were elite Italian troops at all. Faced with this situation, Cossens did not restrain his subordinates like he did in Italy before. He knew that this time everyone came with the intention of winning the battle with the enemy. As a result, they came here to work on road construction first, and the inner gap was too great. It's so big that it's inevitable that it's a bit uninteresting. Here, take a sip. Facing the kettle handed to him by his friend, Cossens took a sip, but then he looked at his friend with wide eyes, because the lake was not water, but wine. I brought it secretly, knowing his friend's thoughts. Berry gave an explanation. Be careful next time, and don't get caught. Faced with Cossens's words, Berry smiled, took the kettle, and covered it carefully. I know it won't be discovered. Then, when will it be our turn to switch defenses on the front line? After Berry put down the kettle, he immediately asked another question that everyone was concerned about. I don't know about this either. It needs to be decided by the command staff. Differently, I heard that the regiment commander has already contacted General Simeon. If there is any news, it should be in the next few days. Faced with inquiries from his friends, Cossens told the news he knew point after hearing what his friend said. Berry spoke out his wish. I really hope that this hard work of building roads can be ended soon, so that we can easily capture the Abyssinian emperor to Rome, so that we can all be promoted. Faced with his friend's unreliable wishes, Cossens smiled and thought of a solution for him. It's a good idea that you have, but it requires the cooperation of the Abyssinian emperor. First, he needs to leave his army, and then walk up to you empty-handed. You only need to raise your gun, and the war will be over. Berry laughed out loud at his friend's joke. Ha ha ha, you still understand my thoughts best. While the two friends were having fun on the construction site, Simonsi was listening to the report at the Expeditionary Force headquarters in Asmera, reporting to the general, as of yesterday, we have recruited a total of 12,000 local people from nearby areas to participate in the road construction project. According to the estimates of Lieutenant Colonel Zamora of the 4th Engineer Regiment, this will reduce our workload by 8.7%. In addition, in response to the shortage of tools, we found out from a ship that was passing by that it docked at Massaua, that it was transporting various construction tools. After negotiating with the ship owner, we purchased these tools from him for 610,000 lire. This can provide temporary relief from missing tools. I believe that, when Rome sends enough tools, our problem will no longer exist. In addition, officers reported various tedious incidents, mostly caused by the need to build roads. There is a lack of tools, and the army is dissatisfied with him becoming a coolie. These situations all need him to deal with. However, although it is cumbersome, Simone believes that this is an exercise for himself. As long as he can build a road to the Abyssinian plateau, he will be able to impress others. Yes, Simeon believed that the biggest factor blocking his army was the road problem. As for the Abyssinians he needed to deal with, he could only rank second. Don't think this is Simeon looking down on the opponent. This is years of experience. Although the British and French secretly transported a lot of weapons and ammunition to the Abyssinians, the war was not more fought than more people or more guns. No matter how advanced the weapons are, they need to be used rationally, and no matter how they compare, the Abyssinians are no match for the troops he leads. To be fair, under the same conditions, the Italian army could deal with 5 times the Abyssinian army. This is the embodiment of training, tactical application, and on-the-spot reaction of officers. So Simone, what is needed most now is to build roads. As long as his supplies continue, the Abyssinians will have no chance. Today's first chapter, Steamed Buns. Please subscribe. Thank you all book friends for your support. Thank you. Chapter 133 Take Action. The hard work of building roads did not last long. As 2 engineering regiments rushed from Rome to Eritrea, and the local people enthusiastically signed up to join the road construction army. The salary was 30 lire per month. The guards had no time to do it. The army was the first batch of troops to be freed from it. Of course, after getting rid of their status as road construction workers, there will inevitably be things handed to them. Simone asked them to drive to the Adiquera front line and pay attention to the actions of the Abyssinians at all times. Although the Abyssinians pretend to be stubborn, they are afraid of everything, so necessary defense and protection are things that every qualified commander should pay attention to. Of course, Simone would not wait until the roads were completely repaired before taking action against Abyssinia. After the loaded carriages could barely reach Adiquera, Simeon immediately asked the 3rd Guards Regiment, the 3rd Mountain Brigade and a Mountain Artillery Battalion of the 7th Artillery Regiment to form an advance force and cross the border line, defined by Italy, to advance towards Mera. Meratha is located on the edge of the Abyssinian Plateau and is a key point on the road connecting the country with Eritrea. 60 kilometers behind it is the important town of Adua in the northern part of the plateau. 2 roads branch off from Adwa to the southeast. To the west is the road to Gondar, its old capital on the side of Lake Tana. To the south is the road to the current Abyssinian capital Dis. If you continue southward, you can reach Shoa. It can be said that Adua is a strategic key city in the north. Simeon's attack on Mera was obviously a test to see if he could attract the main force of the Abyssinian army. Point of course, if it fails to attract the main force of the Abyssinian army, it will not be a loss to Simone, because this can continue to build the road to the plateau. This time he made up his mind that he would not launch a large-scale offensive unless the road was built onto the plateau. Boom, boom, boom. The artillery kept bombarding the stone fort on the ridge, and the blown stones scattered in all directions, revealing the earthen walls wrapped inside. And this ferocious shelling made the Abyssinian soldiers hiding in the stone fort dare not show their faces at all. Major General Wagman, who is the commander of the 3rd Mountain Brigade and the commander of this advance team, is carefully observing the results of the shelling with high-powered binoculars. He was very satisfied with the artillery skills of the officers and soldiers of the 7th Artillery Regiment. It was indeed a veteran unit, and its artillery skills were much better than those of the artillery battalion in his brigade. However, he was not satisfied with the result of the shelling. The round of shelling just now hit the stone castle and failed to cause enough damage. It seems that the artillery in his hands is not powerful enough. He only has 2 types of mountain guns, 75 and 57mm, so the power is naturally not much greater. However, he wanted a more powerful artillery and thought of the hardships along the way, so Wagman intuitively gave up the idea. Since artillery cannot directly defeat the opponent, let the infantry attack. Anyway, we have fought against such a fortress many times before, and this time is not bad. Let the infantry attack. Following Major General Wagman's order, a battalion of Italian soldiers immediately formed a skirmish line and moved toward the bunker. After seeing the Italian troops approaching, the Abyssinian soldiers in the fortress stepped forward and picked up their weapons and began to fight back. For a while, the officers and soldiers of the 2 sides were fighting lively, but the fierce battle did not attract the interest of Cosenz, who was responsible for performing security duties. He did not even look at the battlefield. Cosenz, how long do you think it will take to capture this fortress this time? His friend appeared next to him, and what he said seemed not to worry about friendly forces at all. I don't know about this, but based on the intensity of the firefight, it should not exceed 3 hours. Faced with Bera's inquiry, although Cosenz felt that it was not good to speak of friendly forces like this, he still gave his own judgment. Okay, I see, but then Bera's words almost made him fall down. The betting is now open. Let's bet on whether we can capture this fortress in 2.5 hours this time. Starting from the time of launching the attack, unexpectedly, someone would respond to Bera's words. Count me in. I'll bet a pack of cigarettes. Me, 2 packs. I'll bet on a bottle of wine. I faced with this situation. Cosenz felt a little embarrassed, so he stepped forward and grabbed his friend. You are crazy. If anyone finds out, we will all suffer. It doesn't matter. We have fought against small bunkers like this before. It's basically like that. And if we don't have some fun, everyone will lose interest. Bera's words made Cosenz not know what to say. Pay attention to yourself. Then he left. Maybe watching other people's battles would help improve himself. Boom. A loud explosion, far louder than before, attracted everyone's attention. Anyone with experience knows that this is a dynamite package exploding. The gate of this small fortress and a small half of its walls were blown down, revealing the scene inside the castle. At this time, the officers and soldiers watching cheered, which meant that the battle had entered the final stage. But at this time, Berry looked at his watch and immediately shouted happily. 2 hours and 8 minutes. The fortress was breached. His words made several soldiers lament. Major General Wagman did not know the situation of the troops below, but seeing that the fortress blocking the road had been breached, he gave instructions to the officers around him. Let the front troops go. We are already too far behind the schedule. Yes, Major General Wagman doesn't even want to read the battle results report now. What's so cool about this is that he killed 100 or 200 Abyssinian soldiers, captured more than 100 prisoners of war, and then seized many junk like guns and cold weapons. For such a result, his troops were stuck here for half a day. This is also the biggest headache for Major General Wagman. This road is originally difficult to walk, and these nails need to be pulled out one by one. It is not enough if we don't pull them out. These small fortresses are all key points that control the road, and we can't get through them unless we fight them. Even if they sent troops to surround and let the large troops pass, they couldn't do it because the Abyssinians placed one or two small artillery pieces in this small fortress, completely blocking the entire road, forcing Major General Wagman to pull out one by one out. This was also the main culprit for Major General Wagman taking the advance team, which took 6 days to march 70 kilometers. You should know that the road from Mera to Adiquera is only 84 kilometers. According to this speed, he would need to walk for 2 days before he could see Mera. However, in addition to roads and enemies, Major General Wagman also has another threat, and that is the climate. The temperature difference here is huge, reaching more than 10 degrees at night and reaching more than 30 and close to 40 degrees at noon. There is such a huge temperature difference between day and night, causing serious attrition of his troops. At present, hundreds of people in the advance team he leads have become ill and have lost their combat effectiveness. But fortunately, it was not easy to come up. It was much better when he went back. Except for some seriously ill patients, other patients with mild symptoms were placed in the stronghold he had established to slowly recover. However, this also caused the strength of the contingent he led to drop from more than 8,000 to about 8,000. However, considering the next situation, Major General Wagman felt that it was necessary to send another batch of medicines from the rear. In addition, the consumption of artillery shells was a bit high, so he could also ask the rear to send some. Thinking of this, Major General Wagman took out a pen and wrote a list, then called a messenger. Give this list to Colonel Mora in Adiquera and ask him to send up another supply according to the list. Colonel Mora is the head of logistics based in Adiquera, so there is nothing wrong with asking him for various supplies. As you command, General. The ordering soldier took the list, saluted with a military salute, and immediately mounted his horse and rushed to the rear with a few soldiers. After Major General Wagman ordered the messengers, he led the large troops and continued to rush towards Mera Point. Although there were several fortresses along the way, the determined Major General Wagman pulled them out all the way. Although it took him 2.5 days, he finally felt relieved. After seeing Mera City. No one will feel happy if they continue to pull out nails. I hope that the Abyssinians in Mera can withstand the angry Italian army. Don't think that steamed bun is slow to update. All the previously saved manuscripts were taken out by the leader of this guy Sudan, and I still owe him 2 chapters. I'm still at work today, so I write all my writing secretly. Please understand this hard-working part-time writer, Mantau. In addition, I asked to subscribe again, but the first order result was not as expected, and Mantau was very scared. Chapter 134. There is always a suitable one. The city of Mera was filled with smoke, and the gunfire from time to time made people realize that the enemy had not completely given up resistance. However, the outcome of the battle will not change. Mera City, which has been breached, has no room for resistance. Although the resistance of the Abyssinians was fierce, the previous battles had broken the courage of these brave and capable East African warriors. Cosenz felt frightened, even when he thought of the Abyssinian counterattack in the morning. That time, the 3rd Guards Regiment, which was launching an attack, had just approached the city of Mera. Before they were ready to blast the city gate, the gate of Mera opened wide, and countless painted Abyssinians rushed out from inside. This was completely beyond the expectations of the officers and soldiers of the 3rd Guards Regiment, making them feel somewhat unprepared. Although under the orders of the officers, the soldiers fired at the enemies who rushed out with their guns. But after all, it was different from the calm time. This time the firing did not stop the Abyssinians. They rushed towards the 3rd Guards Regiment with weapons in hand. The fearless look on his face made Cosenz feel that he might have to confess here. At this time, thanks to the support firepower from the rear positions and the suppression from artillery and Maxim machine guns, they were able to withstand the enemy's offensive. As the commander, Major General Wagman immediately sent out 3 infantry battalions for emergency support. Only then did he repulse the Abyssinian attack, and when the enemy retreated, he followed the enemy. The gate was captured, and the battle began in Mera City. The fighting in the city is now coming to an end, and it is expected that the rebels will be wiped out in less than a while. Thinking of this, Cosenz couldn't help but look at the prisoners in front of him again. These are the Abyssinians who surrendered to Italy. They were detained together, and the company responsible for guarding them was a company commanded by Cosenz. The prisoner he was staring at had a fearful and uneasy expression on his face, and anyone could see the fear in his eyes. This made Cosenz couldn't help but think that the scene he saw in the morning was his own hallucination. Look what I found. Just when Cosenz was thinking about this, his friend Barry found him with a mysterious look. Cosenz watched his friend secretly open a bag, which contained some plant stems, leaves, and seeds, which made him curious. What's this? Barry said with a smile when he saw his friend's expression of confusion. That's why those Abyssinians are so brave. After hearing his friend's words, Cosenz curiously picked it up and smelled it, and asked a pungent question that made him sneeze several times in a row. What does it smell like? It's the smell of marijuana. Marijuana. Barry's words shocked Cosenz, because he had never touched this thing before. However, although he has never touched it, he knows its effects. No wonder these Abyssinians are so heroic. It's the temptation of the devil. Well, it seems Cosenz is still a Catholic. Yes, this is the devil's temptation. My friend repeated his words with a rich look on his face. You don't want to sell it, do you? Cosenz, who had read through his friend's thoughts, showed an incredulous expression. Cosenz's words made Barry quickly restrain himself. Ahem. How is this possible? I plan to find a place where no one is and destroy it. Well, let's go destroy these dirty things together. Cosenz, who saw through his friend's tricks, was worried about him acting alone. I have an upset stomach and need to go to the bathroom. Barry, who was exposed, immediately used his last move, and then he ran away like a rabbit without looking back. Running so fast, I don't have to worry about getting it in my crotch. Seeing his friend's actions, Cosenz could only shake his head helplessly. For junior officers such as Cosenz, winning the battle was the most important thing. However, for Major General Wagman, who commanded this battle of Mera was useless. Apart from capturing Mera, it failed to achieve its purpose at all. What cowards these Abyssinians are. Well, it seems that what Major General Wagman wants to wait for is not the garrison of Mera City, but the main force of the Abyssinians. When he set out, Simeon gave him face-to-face instructions according to Lieutenant General Simeon's analysis. If the Abyssinians want to defend their enemies from outside the country, Merit is the best choice. Because it is located between the Abyssinian Plateau and the Eritrean Mountains, there are ravines here, which is very conducive to the enemy hiding their troops. Therefore, Major General Wagman was asked to pay attention to possible dangers when attacking Mera. This is also the reason why Major General Wagman only allowed the 3rd Guards Regiment to attack with 8,000 troops. But it is a pity that Mera was captured, and the Abyssinians did not ambush themselves in Mera. That's right, Major General Wagman hoped that the main force of the Abyssinians would ambush him in Mera. Only in this way could he catch their main force and make great achievements for himself. You must know that this time he brought enough supplies and ammunition, and also a defensive weapon, Maxim machine gun, which also brought a total of 38. It is a pity that God did not hear his prayer and let the Abyssinians escape disaster, but it doesn't matter. If the fast method doesn't work, then use the slow method, which can still make these damn Abyssinians die obediently. Thinking of this, he turned around and spoke to the messenger beside him. Inform General Simeon immediately that our army has captured Mera and await further instructions. As you command, General. Major General Wagman captured Marat, and within 2 days Simeon knew it. After reading the report sent in his hand, Simeon spoke to the Chief of Staff beside him. It seems that our enemy is very smart and the first plan did not work. Faced with Simeon's words, Bartlett, the Chief of Staff, said indifferently, "It doesn't matter. Don't we have a backup plan? In this case, just activate the backup plan in order to deal with various situations in the war." Major General Bartlett, who was born in the General Staff Department, made many plans. But in order to end this war as soon as possible, we first adopted the method of luring the snake out of its hole. If you see that this method doesn't work, then it doesn't matter. There is still a plan. These are all carefully prepared by Bartlett for the Abyssinians, and there is always one that suits them. Then, next, we need time to build the road to Mera. Simeon said the most important thing at the moment. That's just right. Contacting the Sudanese people also takes time, with the two deciding. A new round began against the Abyssinians. As for whether the Abyssinians knew about Italy's actions, they need to ask Johannes IV to find out. However, Italy's performance of not moving after capturing Mera made the emperor a little nervous. My grades were not very satisfactory, and my mentality was a little depressed. Why? Chapter 135 Sudan Invasion. Adua, a strategic military and economic town on the border of the Abyssinian Plateau, has always been heavily stationed because it is the best place to defend against enemies coming from the Red Sea. Now, this has become the place where the Abyssinian Emperor Johannes IV hoards troops. More than 100,000 troops are distributed throughout Adwa, making it almost a large military camp, with soldiers dressed everywhere. Since there are many soldiers, there are also many things to do. Stealing, fighting, molesting women, and other unfavorable nonsense are common in Adua. The officials in charge of public security could not take care of these troublemakers in the army at all. They had to ask Emperor Johannes IV to send his personal guards to severely punish a group of people, so that the atmosphere became a little better. At least they would not rob and molest in broad daylight. When waiting for a hookup, I also know that I have to do it behind the other person's back. Speaking of the bad things that soldiers do, no one knows, but because they all belong to different units, and some of them have only been in the army for less than a month, they lack fear of military discipline. But then again, it would be strange if the Abyssinian army, which has a strong feudal atmosphere, doesn't cause some trouble. However, His Majesty Johannes, the Lord of Abyssinia, did not pay much attention to the troubles in the army. As long as they were made too much, they still needed to deal with the Italians. But when it came to the Italians, Johannes had a headache, because the Italians were still waiting, making him anxious. Wait, the Italians don't come, making Emperor Johannes anxious. That's right, His Majesty the Emperor was anxiously waiting. Because it is easy to gather this army of more than 100,000 people, but it is not easy to raise this army. As a feudal country, Johannes, as the emperor, could not mobilize supplies across the country. He also needed to consider the feelings of princes everywhere. You must know that this army of 178,000 people is divided into 3 parts. Among them, there are only 76,000 troops directly under his command. Among the remaining 102,000 people, there are 54,000 troops brought by the princes and 48,000 troops. 10,000 people are composed of various tribes. Since these troops have come to fight in response to the emperor's call, the material problem needs to be solved for others. It is impossible for others to send troops and also bring their own materials. Isn't this embarrassing? Therefore, as the emperor, Johannes IV has been very overwhelmed recently. If the Italian doesn't come again, he will almost not be able to feed him with so many mouths. It can also be seen from here how barren Abyssinia is. The emperor, who occupies nearly half of the land, cannot support an army of more than 100,000 people for 2 months. This also shows how strong industrial countries are in crushing agricultural countries. But you have to eat it if you can't bear it. As Emperor Johannes IV, he knew very well that the Italians came for him, and he would not let those troops go home just because of this. But after waiting for a long time, there will naturally be different voices. No, at a new meeting, someone raised an objection. If this continues, how long will we have to wait? It will be the busy farming season soon, and then the hearts of the soldiers will fly to their own farmland. At the banquet held by Emperor Johannes IV in the governor's palace in Adwa, someone raised their own questions. These words attracted everyone's attention, and as the emperor, Johannes IV took a closer look and saw that it was the Duke of Oromia who was expressing his opinion. This duke's territory is in the southeastern part of the Abyssinian plateau, and his strength is not weak, only weaker than himself and Menelik II of Shoa. Facing this local powerhouse ranked 3rd in the country, Johannes IV certainly could not ignore his opinion, and he also saw that the other princes were somewhat moved after what he said. These conscripted armies are not full-time soldiers. At least half of them are semi-professional soldiers who cannot be full-time. These semi-professional soldiers who are busy farming and training in their spare time have always been the main force of Abyssinia's army. This is a custom that has been passed down from ancient times otherwise, based on the barren fields of the Abyssinian plateau. How could it be possible to maintain such a large army? However, the advantage of such a semi-professional army is that daily maintenance costs are very low, and it can save the limited funds of princes and nobles everywhere. The disadvantage is also obvious. During the busy farming season, these soldiers will be distracted from the farm work at home. The Duke of Oromia obviously raised his concerns based on this current situation. But since some people raise objections, some people supported. After the Duke of Oromia put forward this sentence, as Emperor Johannes IV, he knew that not giving a solution would cause instability in the military. The Duke of Oromia is right. If we wait like this, the soldiers will not focus on the battle. Johannes IV first praised him, but then the topic changed. However, the war between our country and Italy has just begun, and it is impossible to let him go home. So we need to tell the soldiers that the Italians are coming to conquer us and turn us into their slaves. But this mouth alone cannot solve the problem. When faced with what Johannes IV said, some people expressed different opinions. I also know this, so taking this into consideration, I can offer 6,000 cattle, 50,000 sheep, and 3 million kilograms of grain as compensation. However, the amount may not be large, and I still need your support. When Johannes IV said this, he turned his attention to his son-in-law. As the emperor looked at him, Menelik II, the Lord of Shoa, cursed inwardly and made a righteous expression on his face. I agree with the emperor's words. For this reason, I have decided to provide 3,000 cattle, 30,000 sheep, and 1.5 million kilograms of grain to supplement. In addition, the conscripted soldiers in my territory will be exempted from half of the poll tax in the next 2 years. That's right, since Menelik II wants to do it, he should put himself in a benchmark position. But it's just a bit of a trap for others. Menelik II's words made other princes present curse secretly, but in the face of the joint stance of these two, others could only follow suit. So you have 100, and I have 50, and the total amount is nearly 10 million kilograms of grain, and there are more than 80,000 sheep and more than 30,000 cattle. And there are another 2,400 camels. However, there seemed to be a lot of these supplies, and they were distributed to everyone, like pepper noodles. But in the end, we are still united, and I believe the soldiers below will understand this after reluctantly dealing with the army's problems. As if God didn't want Johannes IV to have a good day, an even more shocking news came. His Majesty, Prime Minister Matthias walked in quickly with the messenger. His face was extremely ugly, which surprised everyone present. What's the matter? When Johannes IV saw the Prime Minister's expression, his heart skipped a beat and he immediately asked. Faced with the inquiry from Johannes IV, Prime Minister Matthias did not speak. Faced with the inquiry of Johannes IV, the Prime Minister did not speak, but the messenger on the side spoke. But no one present expected that he would bring shocking news. Except of course the Prime Minister. Your Majesty, the Sudanese invaded Metemma, and Governor Yagudis asked me to ask for help. Thank you everyone for your support. I never thought that a complaint would lead to such a caring book friend giving a reward to Steamed Bun. Steamed Buns would like to thank everyone in advance. When the Steamed Buns are rested, I will definitely add more to reward everyone. Thank you for your support. Although the subscription results are not very satisfactory, Manta will work hard to update it to make the fans happy. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136. What did you say? The news was so shocking that Johannes IV could not help but stand up with his eyes wide open. As for the other princes and nobles, they also had shocked expressions on their faces facing the majestic aura exuded by Johannes IV. The messenger was so frightened that he did not dare to breathe out. He held it in for a long time before stumbling and repeating it. Seeing that the messenger was so frightened, Matthias, as Prime Minister, patted his shoulder to encourage him. How many Sudanese people were attacking? When did you know about it? Also, did Metemma fall? Faced With one after another questions from Johannes IV, the messenger stumbled and explained the situation he knew one by one point as he told the story. Everyone learned that there were as many as 80,000 Sudanese people attacking this time. 7 days ago, they suddenly appeared in Metemma. Upon seeing this, the defenders of Metemma hurriedly sent someone to notify Governor Yagudis, and he and more than a dozen comrades were sent by Governor Yagudis to report the news, and as the messenger who sent the message reported, no one spoke for a while in the hall, and the atmosphere suddenly became quiet. However, this situation did not last long, because 120 kilometers further west from Metemma is Lake Tana. And the Sudanese must be aiming here. This is one of the 3 major granaries in Abyssinia, and it is also the largest. Naturally, such a piece of land cannot be taken away by the Sudanese. We cannot ignore the Sudanese threat, and must drive away the Sudanese, otherwise our homeland will be taken over by infidels. The first one to stand up was Duke Bahidar, whose territory was on the west bank of Lake Tana. Although it only has a territory of less than 5,000 square kilometers on the west coast, its richness allows the Duke of Bahidar to firmly occupy a mid-range position among the princes. He was also one of the first people to fall to Johannes IV, and he can be considered a veteran. However, seeing the possibility that the Sudanese might threaten the territory, the Duke of Bahidar immediately stood up. As the Duke of Bahidar spoke, several princes with nearby territories immediately followed suit. Yes, everyone knows that the Sudanese threaten us, and we cannot sit idly by and ignore it. Yes, these Sudanese are like robbers. As long as they pass by, nothing will be left. Property, livestock, and population are like locusts. The echoes came one after another, disturbing the hall. However, these princes who spoke were basically relatively weak, and the most powerful among them was the Duke of Bahidar. Johannes IV watched their performance with cold eyes. Facing the cold gaze of the emperor, the princes and nobles who were shouting like sparrows gradually felt that the atmosphere was wrong and stopped speaking. Everyone, we are facing a very bad situation now. There are Italians in the north and Sudanese in the west, but we Abyssinians are not afraid of the enemy. This time we must work together to ensure our independence. Well, Johannes IV can't sit still anymore. With the invasion of the Sudanese, the situation became extremely unfavorable for him. He must send troops and deal with one enemy first to save the situation. Of course, choosing your opponent is very important. If you don't choose well, everything will be lost. In fact, there were not many choices for him. Either fight the Sudanese first or fight the Italians first. It would be easier to choose one of the two. In fact, no matter which one he fights, Johannes IV knows how bad the situation he faces this time is. However, considering his current position and level of preparation, he actually has only one choice, and that is the Italians. Thinking of this, Johannes IV regretted a little. He should have dealt a heavy blow to the Italians in Mera. At that time, he blamed himself for being too hesitant and allowing the Italians to occupy Mera Point. But now if you want to deal with the Italians, you must use some strategies. He is no match for the Italians in a head-on confrontation. The old proverb teaches that when faced with a bull, do not wrestle with it. Johannes IV carefully sketched the plan in his mind, thinking hard about how to win. Faced with the sudden thought of Johannes IV, no one else said a word. After what seemed like a long time, Johannes IV finally took action. He stood up and spoke to his son-in-law, Menelik. Arrive, you. Lead your own troops to besiege Mera. In addition, I will ask Elia to lead 20,000 people to cooperate with you. Johannes gave the most important task to his son-in-law, because Menelik's army was the most powerful except for his. And in order to make the Italians believe that the main force of his own army was besieging Mera, he also asked his son to bring 20,000 people to assist, as commanded. Faced with the task given by Emperor Johannes, the Lord of Shoa accepted the task without any nonsense. Menelik was so happy that Johannes IV said nothing, but stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder hard. Your mission is very important. You need to convince the Italians in Mera that they are encountering our large force. Although Johannes seemed a bit talkative, Menelik answered very seriously in view of the importance of his task. Okay, I will launch a fierce offensive and make the enemy panic and call for help. After getting a satisfactory answer from his son-in-law, Johannes spoke to the remaining princes. Others Follow me and let the Italians know how good we are. Yes, Johan's plan is very simple, that is, to gather reinforcement around the point. But although it is simple, it is very practical. The crisscross terrain around Mera is also suitable for hiding large troops. Since it is so suitable for supporting the spot, why not use Johans as Johans issued the order? The princes and nobles present immediately stood up and left. It takes time to organize the army and deploy. In addition, carrying grain and grass, and surveying water sources need to be done in advance. When others left, Menelik II also prepared to leave, but then he was stopped. Your Highness Menelik, His Majesty the Emperor invites you. Menelik stopped and followed the visitor to a small garden. Here he saw his father-in-law, but unlike before, his face was full of sadness. Menelik, you're here. Yes. When Menelik came to him, Johan spoke, but he did not say why he invited him over. This is a courtyard that I ordered to be built when His Majesty appointed me as the governor. It has been more than 20 years, and I didn't expect that I would succeed His Majesty after his death. Menelik certainly knew who His Majesty was mentioned by Johannes IV. It was the former Emperor Tewodros II. It was this very capable emperor who unified the long divided Abyssinia. At that time, I was still imprisoned in the palace by His Majesty. It was a pity that His Majesty died at the hands of the British. Menelik also experienced that era, but as a prisoner. After his father Haile Malak had died of a serious illness, in order to prevent the Shoa separatist forces from resurrecting, he, the young master of Shoa, was imprisoned by him as a hostage. Facing Menelik's words, Johannes IV looked at the scenery of the garden and said, yes, His Majesty is too stubborn. He is not willing to bow his head at all. Even in desperate situations, he is still unwilling to let go. But at that time, for the sake of power, I did things that were sorry for Your Majesty. I didn't expect that as I got older, I would lose my temper. He looks more and more like His Majesty. What Johannes IV said was that he was promoted all the way to the governor of Tigray by Tewodros II, but he betrayed him when the British came. Having said this, Johannes IV turned to stare at Menelik. I hope you promise me something. Facing Johannes IV's words, Menelik said calmly, please say, if I can do it then I can do it. If not then there's nothing I can do. You can. Johannes IV looked at Menelik and continued, if you succeed to the throne, find a way to keep Elia and let him live happily in Tigray. That's no problem. After all, I'm my son-in-law. No matter what I say, I cannot let my daughter become a widow. Thanks. You're welcome. The conversation between the two ended here. Although neither one said it clearly, both of them knew that this was Johannes IV making some preparations in case of an accident. Menelik agreed to the emperor's request and admitted that he would not touch his territory after his death, at least to give it to his son-in-law, Duke Haile Selassie, and to keep Tigray. Sorry to keep everyone waiting. Chapter 137 Battle of Mera. 1. Dabru Mountain is a mountaintop less than 8 kilometers away from Mera. Although this mountain has sparse vegetation, it has a mountain spring. There is also a winding road that passes through the foot of Dabru Mountain, connecting Mera and Adua. This kind of terrain is very suitable for defense and security, so Major General Wagman, who captured Mera, immediately sent a battalion of troops to defend here as an outpost and security point. The 3rd Battalion, where Cosenz was located, was selected and became the outpost unit stationed in Dablu Mountain to become a frontline force. It must be an elite force. In this regard, the commander, Major General Wagman, values them. In this regard, Cosenz's 3rd Battalion worked together and prepared to use practical actions to let him know that their 3rd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment of the Guards deserved this attention. So, after rushing to Dablu Mountain, the 3rd Battalion was carrying out extensive construction work. After a week of busy work, the defensive position of Dablu Mountain began to take shape. Trenches, parapets, sandbags, earthen fortresses, etc. can be seen everywhere on Dabru Mountain. Standing in the fortifications on the top of the mountain, Cosenz looked at the desolate scenery around him and always felt that it had a unique flavor. Cosenz, I didn't expect you to be here. Panting, Berry climbed up the hillside. What's wrong, Berry? Cosenz looked back at his friend, and asked back point looking at his friend with a question mark on his face. Barry thought for a while and shook his head before answering. "It's nothing. I didn't see you. I wanted to come and have a look." Having said this, Barry stretched his neck with curiosity and looked in the direction his friend was looking. "Let me see what you are looking at." What he saw was a desert with sparse bushes like embellishments on the earth. "There's nothing to see here. I don't know why you like staying here so much, because you can see further here, and it's also clean." Cosence's answer made Barry look at his friend in disbelief. "Do you plan to be a poet, writer, or artist in the future?" Seeing that his friend was going too far, Cosence quickly answered, "None of these." Listening to Cosence's answer, Barry became even more curious. "Then what are you doing here?" "I just wanted to come up and have some cleansing." Sure. After getting Cosence's answer, Barry patted his chest and said, "That's good. I thought you were suffering from battlefield depression." Battlefield blues. Cosence didn't expect his friend to think he had the disease. This is a psychological symptom that occurs when soldiers experience high pressure on the battlefield. "Why do you think so?" Faced with his friend's inquiry, Barry answered truthfully, "I saw that you stayed alone when you were fine, no longer like before, and then some people said that you might have battlefield depression." Ha. Ha ha ha. Listening to Barry's explanation, Cosence was so happy that he couldn't stand up. "Barry, my best friend, I never thought you would think this way." Seeing Cosence's smile, Barry also laughed for some reason point, so the two people on the top of the mountain laughed like fools. "Thanks to my best friend for caring. I'll keep it in mind." Cosence retracted his smile, patted his friend on the shoulder, and said something cautiously. "It doesn't matter. You are my best friend." At this moment, friendship radiated in the air, and the two felt like they were back in the good times in Palermo. Suddenly, Cosence looked into the distance and couldn't help but exclaimed. Barry curiously looked in the direction where his friend was looking. I don't know when there were a few small black dots in the distance, moving towards this side quickly, and more small black dots appeared behind them. "There's a situation." To express their judgments in unison, "Someone is coming. Based on their speed, they should be riding horses. The people behind them should be chasing them." Speaking of this, Cosence reacted immediately. "This is our guy being pursued." Then he took out his pistol and fired into the sky. The crisp sound of gunfire seemed to be a signal, immediately causing a commotion in the position. "What's going on? Who's shooting?" After a while, the voice of Battalion Commander Valery came. Cosence immediately shouted loudly, "I'm the one shooting." Battalion Commander Valery, who reached the top of the mountain, saw Cosence and said with some confusion, "Cosence, what's going on?" Cosence led him to the side where he discovered the situation, pointed and said, "An enemy is coming." Upon hearing Cosence's words, Battalion Commander Valery immediately took out the telescope from his satchel and observed carefully. "They are really our people. There are at least one cavalry battalion-sized enemy chasing them." Valery, who discovered the situation, quickly said to the soldiers behind him, "Give my order. The position is on alert." Following Valery's order, the 3rd Battalion immediately entered combat readiness. Everyone rushed to the fortifications with weapons in hand. The two troops chasing and escaping in the distance were also visible to everyone. The people in front wearing the same military uniforms are friendly troops, but they are not in good condition, and almost everyone is in trouble. Behind him, a large group of Abyssinian cavalry pursued him. As the battalion commander, Valery gave an order to a 57mm gun group behind him after visually checking the distance. "Fire and warn those Abyssinians." Bang! A shell exploded in front of it on the right, causing the pursuing Abyssinian cavalry to slowly stop. They glanced at the waiting Italian officers and soldiers, and left without looking back. Although he saw the enemy cavalry turning away, Valery did not let everyone off their guard, but gave orders. "Cosence, take a few people with you to bring the friendly forces back." "As you command, sir." "Follow me." 2nd platoon, one class at a time. Cosence immediately rushed forward with a dozen soldiers. "Which army are you from?" "When They were still nearly 100 meters away. Cosenz started asking. One of the cavalrymen, wearing the rank of sergeant, answered. We are the 2nd platoon of the 7th company of the cavalry regiment directly under the 3rd army. The numbers were correct, and Cosenz led the people to the other people. How come you are being pursued by the Abyssinians? Give us some water first. Let me drink it, and then tell you. Cosenz didn't bring a kettle with him, so he asked for one from his own soldier, and handed it over. This friendly soldier was not polite and immediately took the kettle, and took a few sips. Then he handed the kettle to the others. The same action was shown in the hands of other cavalrymen. After one round, the bottle of water was finished. The actions of these people made Cosenz realize that these cavalry were elites, but you still have to ask, Cosenz said immediately. Now you can tell me what's going on. We went to Adua to investigate the enemy's situation and accidentally discovered that the enemy was gathering. Then, under the leadership of the platoon leader, we prepared to see what the enemy wanted to do and try to catch a tongue and torture it. But when we caught the tongue, something happened. There was a little accident, and then the enemy chased us all the way here. Now we are the only ones left in our platoon of cavalry. The Sergeant Cavalry's words made everyone in Cosenz stand in awe. Those who dared to investigate under the enemy's nose must be elites, but they were not lucky enough to be discovered by the enemy. What are you going to do now? Go back first and report. I feel something is wrong with these enemies. They have been chasing them all the way here. Okay, do you need anything else? No need. We are only a few steps away from Mera City. Then good luck to you. Goodbye, friend. Goodbye. After seeing off these scout cavalry who never stopped for a moment, Cosenz informed the battalion commander of what he knew. Okay, I understand. They dare to chase us to the front of our position. These Abyssinians are really brave. 2 updates today. Sorry for taking so long and keeping everyone waiting. Chapter 138 Battle of Mera. 2. As low-level officers, they did not know the situation. As the commander of Mera City, Major General Wagner felt a very different atmosphere. All the reconnaissance cavalry we sent were driven back. This is very abnormal, Major. General Wagner watched the reports from the meeting that kept coming in, which made his forehead wrinkle even more. In front of him was Colonel Cabrera, the chief of staff of the advance team, who also agreed with his point of view. Yes, the enemy has covered the entire battlefield, so there will definitely be a big move. Should we send people to take a look? Facing the words of his chief of staff, Major General Wagner shook his head and said, no, we don't have much reconnaissance power at our disposal. And even if we send it out, how can we stop the enemy's encirclement and suppression? Cabrera thought of the reports he had read before. The reconnaissance troops had encountered crazy encirclement and suppression by 10 times more enemies, and these Abyssinian cavalry were searching like a net, not letting go of any clues. It must be said that on the Abyssinian plateau, the Italian cavalry was no match for these people. Cabrera was a little reluctant when he thought that the enemy must be making big moves. Then what should we do? Protect your retreat and wait. Yes. After Cabrera heard Wagner's decision, he didn't know what to say, but no matter what he wanted to do, facing the enemy's frantic surge, he really had no good way. Who dares to consume the Abyssinian cavalry with too few cavalry? Of course, waiting was not Wagner's only idea. In addition to sending a letter to General Simeon in the rear to inform him of the current situation, he also ordered the troops around Mera City to continue building fortifications and sent troops to strengthen the defense from Adiquera to Mera. He had a feeling that the enemy would definitely attack his supply line. His premonition was accurate. About 5 days later, the enemy appeared. At Dabru Mountain, Cosenz and his officers and soldiers looked at the scene outside with nervous expressions. In fact, he was not the only one, but the entire 3 battalions defending Dabru Mountain felt nervous. There must be at least 50,000 to 60,000 enemies. The voice of his friend came from beside him. Berry looked at so many enemies and couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Only more, not less. Cosenz looked at the overwhelming enemies and answered his friend with a serious expression. On the side of the position commander, Battalion Commander Valery, he pulled over a messenger. Report to Major General Wagner immediately. The enemy is attacking. There are at least 60,000 troops. We need reinforcement. 500 to 60,000. Battalion Commander Valery did not have this daydream. A qualified officer should know how to make choices. Of course, he does not want, and will not surrender to the enemy point. After giving orders to the messengers, Valery's loud voice spread throughout the battlefield. Cheer up and don't act like a bitch. No matter how many enemies there are, they still won't have as many bullets as we do. It's so strange sometimes. After the battalion commander yelled at them, many people became less nervous. The news that the Abyssinian troops were encountered at the Dabualu mountain position soon reached the ears of Major General Wagman. After hearing the news of the enemy's attack, he immediately ordered, "Let other troops of the 3rd Guards Regiment go for reinforcement. The position on Dabualu mountain cannot be lost." Major General Wagman did not intend to give up this position so easily. With the defenders of Dabualu mountain in check, the enemy would not be able to fully encircle Mera, which was very important to him. In addition to letting the 3rd Guards Regiment reinforce his 3rd Battalion, Major General Wagman also had other measures. Give orders to the strongholds along the way to Adiquera. If they encounter invincible opponents, they are allowed to abandon their strongholds. In addition, send a letter to General Simeon. Major General Wagman quickly wrote on a piece of paper, "Lieutenant General, the enemy has come to Mera City. Please decide how to fight. I will hold my position and wait for the appearance of the Lieutenant General." He quickly folded the signed paper and put it into the envelope, then handed it over to the order. Although he had previously ordered troops to be sent to reinforce various strongholds along the road, but now faced with the enemy's large-scale appearance, he was ready to abandon these strongholds. After all, there are only 200 to 300 people in these strongholds. If they are surrounded by enemies, he will not be able to send troops for reinforcement. Following Major General Wagman's order, Merit's Italian troops immediately mobilized and prepared to fight the incoming enemy point. But while they were still preparing, the battle on Mount Dabualu had already begun. Boom, boom, boom. The artillery from the attacking side kept bombarding the position, while the officers and soldiers of the 3rd Battalion stayed calmly behind the fortifications and watched the Abyssinian artillery performance. There was no way the enemy's artillery performed too poorly and basically fired at random. The bombardment lasted for nearly half an hour, and the only result was that a section of the parapet was destroyed, killing a few unlucky guys hiding behind it. But think about it, if you want to train an elite artillery force, you need to practice with artillery shells. For Abyssinians who need to import everything, this cost is too staggering. So except for a small amount of artillery skills that were barely good, the rest were simply trained. Even for many artillerymen, today was the first time they fired artillery. With such quality, how can there be too many accurate shots? It would be great if he can hit it. Perhaps seeing the poor performance of his artillery, the enemy commander then ordered the artillery to stop. Then the fighting soldiers appeared. As soon as these soldiers with various weapons appeared, the officers and soldiers of the 3rd Battalion who were hiding from stray bullets behind the position appeared. Steady, don't rush yet, steady. The officers in the position give orders to the soldiers around them, which can relieve the tension in the hearts of the soldiers. When the attacking Abyssinian officers saw that there was no firing in the position, they kept encouraging the soldiers to speed up and rush to the position. 400 meters! 300 meters. Fire. Seeing that the enemy was approaching the optimal range, Cosenz, who was directing the battle, let out a roar. Bang. Bang bang. Following his order, gunfire erupted immediately on the position, and the enemy soldiers rushing at the front fell to the ground. Attack, don't stop. The enemy commander completely ignored the casualties and kept ordering his troops not to stop attacking. Cosenz, on the other hand, took the rifles in his own company's hands and reaped the lives of the enemies. However, there were too many enemies. The constant stream of enemies made it difficult for their shooting to keep up with the rhythm. The enemies were getting closer and closer to their position. Suddenly, a sound different from that of a rifle came. Ta 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 ta. The Maxim machine gun behind the position opened fire, and the charging enemies were cut down in pieces like wheat. When the enemy saw the continuous firepower erupting from their position, they immediately ordered their troops to retreat. Many princes have tried the machine guns in the hands of the Italians, so it is normal to be a little afraid. Another more important point is that they have figured out the firepower of the position, and perhaps a fierce battle will break out during the next attack. Please give me some recommendation votes. This drop is so scary. Chapter 139 Battle of Mera 3. However, the next attack day never started because reinforcement from the 3rd Guards Regiment came up. Faced with the Italian troop strength changing from 500 to nearly 3,000, Menelik II, who led the team, suspended the attack. He needs more heavy firepower, and the artillery's previous performance was too poor and needs to be rectified. In addition, he also needs to send troops to contain other directions, and the enemy will inevitably threaten him from the flanks. In addition, he also has a task, which requires him to surround the enemies of Mera City, but Emperor Johannes IV can help with this task. When Menelik II appeared with his troops in front of the enemies of Mera, Emperor Johannes IV, with a main force of 110,000, was passing through 20 kilometers west of Mera. It is extremely barren and uninhabited, but there is a small stream locally called Natamu. Although it cannot provide enough water for its own army, coupled with the existence of several underground rivers, it can barely provide the army with enough water. Johannes IV, as emperor, moved with the army in a cart, drawn by 4 horses, and the messengers who came in and out from time to time allowed him to get the latest news. Your Majesty, General Wartsaw has captured Kalita's sentry. New. As soon as Johannes IV finished speaking, he drew a circle with charcoal on a parchment map. The location where the circle was drawn was exactly a sentry post called Kalita. Your Majesty, His Highness Menelik has led his army to surround Mera. New. His Majesty. The constant news gave Johannes IV the latest control over the battle situation. None of this news made His Majesty the Emperor show any fluctuation in his expression, and he always had a serious expression. However, this situation continued until the evening, when the messenger came to report, and the Menkale stronghold was also pulled out. His expression finally changed, because on the parchment map, there are no Italian strongholds within 50 kilometers of Mera. The first phase has been completed. Next we need to see Menelik's performance and Italy's reaction. The performance of the Master of Shoah cannot be seen yet, but he will have a chance to see Italy's reaction. Mendefera is located between Adiquera and Asmera. It only takes 2 days to reach both places. Of course, it was possible to reach both places so quickly thanks to the previous road construction army. But now the army has stopped building roads, and only the recruited indigenous people and engineers are still doing it. This town, located between the 2 sides, is currently chosen by Simeon as his temporary headquarters, because this allows him to get closer to the front line without giving up control of logistics. It is a good place to get the best of both worlds. When the news came that the Abyssinians were attacking Marat, Simeon immediately cheered up. The opportunity he had been waiting for finally came. It seems that Johannes IV can't sit still. After seeing the news of Merat being surrounded, Simeon was still in the mood to joke with the chief of staff beside him. Major General Bartlett said, after taking a look at the telegram, the Sudanese offensive put Johannes IV in a difficult situation. If they don't take the initiative, they are waiting for death. They can only take advantage of it. Facing the chief of staff's explanation, Simeon immediately said with a serious expression, he also asked for it. If he hadn't acted arrogantly and ignorantly against the Eritrean garrison, this result would not have happened. He has attracted our anger and he must bear the consequences. The 2 commanders of the expeditionary force were not worried about Major General Wagner in Mera City at all, and they still had the heart to tease the Abyssinian emperor. What makes them so reassured is not only that Major General Wagner has 8,000 troops, but also that he has sufficient supplies. The ammunition is enough for 2 months of fighting, and the food and grass are enough for 3 months. Since there is no shortage of ammunition and food, there is nothing to worry about. Since there is no need to worry about relieving Major General Wagner's advance team, Simeon and others are more concerned about another issue: how to capture the enemy's main force and prevent it from running away. Now, we need to consider how to capture the main force of Abyssinia and prevent them from running away. I don't want to start a pursuit on the plateau. What are you going to do? Facing the chief of staff's inquiry, Simeon looked at the map in front of him and was struck by inspiration, so he spoke. I have an idea. What do you think? Simeon pointed to the map in front of him and said, Mera is surrounded. It is obvious that Johannes IV wants us to reinforce him. He must be watching our every move in a corner. Considering Abyssinia people are more familiar with the environment there than we are, so we need to be a little more prepared. Chief of Staff Bartlett agreed very much with Simeon's words. Although they were not worried about the safety of Major General Wagman's advance team, their main task was to defeat Johannes IV and make the Abyssinians surrender. So what should they do? Which requires careful consideration. Then, what do we do? The Chief of Staff's question made Simeon curl up his lips. This is what I think. If we all press forward, although it will be safe and the siege of Mera can be lifted, it is possible that Johannes IV will escape. So my idea is that there must be reinforcement, but the strength cannot be too strong or too weak, and it is best to control the number of people to about 10,000. Simeon's words made Bartlett feel a little dangerous. 10,000 people, isn't that a little too low? The number of enemies reaches 160,000 to 70,000. Isn't it too dangerous to reinforce with 10,000 people? You must know that this is a march, unlike Mera, who has a solid defensive position. Chief of Staff Bartlett's words are very reasonable, because the troops are not in combat status during the march, which is very dangerous if they encounter an enemy surprise attack. Although the soldiers each have their own rifles, the army's important support firepower cannot be in a state of combat readiness. Moreover, the road from Adiquera to Mera was crisscrossed with ravines, which lengthened the queue of troops and slowed down their reaction speed. It can be said that, if Bartlett commanded the Abyssinian army to besiege Mera, it would be a disgrace to what he had learned if he did not attack the reinforcement. That's why he expressed his worries. I have also considered what you said. To this end, I'm preparing to strengthen this reinforcement force in terms of firepower, so that it has enough firepower to block possible enemy raids. Faced with Simeon's words, Bartlett was a little curious. What equipment are you planning to strengthen for them? Artillery cannot counterattack quickly. Rifles are enough. Machine guns require preparation time. Faced with Bartlett's words, Simeon answered with a smile. It's a Maxim machine gun, but a Maxim mounted on a carriage. Chapter 140 Battle of Mera 4. The horse-drawn carriage and Maxim machine gun that Simonai mentioned was something he accidentally came up with while observing the transport convoy. For Simone, the most important thing to pay attention to when fighting the Abyssinians was their surprise attacks and various harassments. On the contrary, he was not worried at all about the large-scale gathering and head-on battles, especially that kind of sudden attack is extremely dangerous for the Italian army or the army of every country. This doesn't give the player much reaction time, and it's especially important for Simeon to focus on this. So he always had the idea of moving the Maxim machine gun faster. In fact, he is not the only one. The military also has this idea. To this end, they are starting from two aspects. One is to reduce the weight of the Maxim machine gun. Regarding this, Mr. Maxim of Beretta Arms Company is already doing this. On the other hand, before Maxim is reduced in weight, he is looking for ways to make him move quickly. Simonai followed this path. In view of the demand for Maxim machine guns on the battlefield, he came up with the idea of using horse-drawn carriages to carry machine guns. The wheels of the machine gun are removed and fixed to the carriage, which can serve as a mobile firepower point. Of course, he hasn't tried it yet as to its specific effects. This time it's just a test of his ideas. Faced with Simeon's idea, Bartlett immediately thought it was an excellent idea. After some thinking, it would keep the machine guns on alert at all times and give the infantry a quick attack against the Abyssinian raids. Support point. Since both commanders agreed, there was nothing more to say. More than 40 carriages were temporarily modified. They removed the carriages, installed thin steel plates on all sides, and then installed the Maxim machine guns with the wheels removed. This was not a major change, and it was completed in less than a day. In addition, in order to allow the machine guns to be redeployed, they also hung the removed Maxim wheels on the rear of the vehicle, so that they could be quickly put back on when the carriage was not in use. As for the troops deployed for this reinforcement, the two of them also made careful selections. First, the 6th Mountain Brigade, which is very good at mountain warfare, will be transferred. In addition, the 7th Artillery Regiment will transfer the remaining light artillery to form a mixed battalion. Then, an infantry regiment, a cavalry battalion, and some 00 generals will be transferred from the 3rd Army. The total number of troops reached more than 9,500. The commander is Major General Pascal, the commander of the 8th Division of the 3rd Army, whom Simonyi trusts the most. As for why he did not let Zealous, the commander of the 6th Mountain Brigade, take into account the seriousness of this mission, Simonyi can only use the one he is most familiar with. Subordinates setting up a support force kept Simeon and others busy for 2 days. Of course, it's not like they did nothing in the past 2 days, except deploying troops. They spread the news that due to reasons such as ordnance and supplies, large troops could not immediately go to support, so they could only send a team to take the lead and reinforce Mera Point. Of course, how could opponents believe false news? For this reason, Simeon specifically requested that a large transport convoy be sent from Massawa to Mindefala. The reason is that this is ammunition and other military supplies that the expeditionary force urgently needs on the other side. They also mobilized troops to strictly block the Adiquera front line, making people believe that the expeditionary force did not want this news to be known to the enemy. After these preparations were almost completed, the reinforcement led by Major General Pascal finally set off from Adiquera. The large number of Italian troops setting off naturally could not be concealed from the eyes and ears of the Abyssinians. In fact, 2 hours after the reinforcement set off, the Abyssinian Emperor Johannes IV received the news. Moreover, the emperor not only received news of the departure of reinforcement, he also knew that there was a large transport convoy heading towards Mindefara at Massawa Port. This is not because the intelligence work of the Italian garrison was poor, but because many places in Eritrea were once within the sphere of influence of the East African Empire of Abyssinia. Later, as the number of Italian colonists increased, the Abyssinians returned to the plateau. Since they have mass base, the Abyssinians' intelligence work is relatively good, and it is reasonable to know some of the movements of the Italian army. After receiving the news, Johannes IV immediately knew that this was his opportunity. Although he didn't know why the Italians had insufficient supplies, or it was a cover for the enemy, but he knew that, as long as this reinforcement force stayed away from Adiquera, a stronghold where Italian troops gathered, the more than 100,000 troops he had on hand would be enough to let him know how powerful the Abyssinian warriors were. Of course, necessary deployment is also necessary. For this reason, he summoned the princes and governors to hold a meeting to prepare for the reinforcement in the temporary big tent. Everyone was listening to the speech of their Emperor Johannes IV. Everyone. The Italians have taken the bait. Their stupid commander only sent 10,000 reinforcement this time to reinforce Mera. This is a perfect opportunity. We don't have to attack the Italians hiding in the turtle shell. This they walked out on their own this time, so we must seize the opportunity and annihilate them in one fell swoop. The encouraging words of Johannes IV caused a burst of cheers in the big tent. As the enemy only sent 10,000 reinforcement this time, no one thought that this would fail. Seeing that everyone's morale was high, Johannes IV then assigned tasks. Duke, Heir, I'm reinforcing you with 2,000 cavalry. You must lead them to harass the reinforcing Italian army as much as possible. At least they will not be able to walk 50 kilometers within 4 days. The Duke of Heir, named by Johannes, has his territory in the eastern part of the plateau because it produces more livestock, and his army is mainly based on cavalry. Johannes IV wanted to take advantage of the cavalry to harass the reinforcing army and slow down its movement. Although he very much wanted the Italian reinforcement to enter his surroundings, a qualified hunter who knew how to hide his purpose and let it march smoothly would definitely arouse doubts. It would be better to act as if he really didn't want reinforcement and first give them enough attacks to slow down their march and make them think they are really attacking Mera City. As you command, Your Majesty, you will see the reputation of the Heir cavalry and will not fail to fall. After receiving the reply from Duke Heir, Johannes IV continued to issue orders. Send a message to Menelik so that their offensive on Mera can be suspended for a while. After we have dealt with the reinforcement of the Italian army, we can join him and jointly capture the city of Mera. Yes, Your Majesty. Then Johannes IV issued orders one after another, arranging other princes to protect the flanks and block the back roads. Basically every prince was assigned a task point. After all this was arranged, Johannes IV looked at the map again. He needed to decide where to place the ambush. Based on the map point to chapters updated chapter 141 Fireball Formation. The village of Alum is located on the road leading to Adiquera, surrounded by mountains. A small stream called Balal passes through the gap in the surrounding mountains. It was also because of this river that the small basin surrounded by it could be cultivated, and the village of Alum came into existence. Alum village is 24 kilometers from Mera city and 60 kilometers from Adiquera. Such excellent terrain was very suitable for a large-scale siege, so Johannes IV used it as a battlefield for the reinforcement of the Italian army. So the Abyssinian army is arriving around one after another. The reason why they did not arrive here directly is because there are too many troops. If they are all crowded here, let alone ambushes, they will probably scare the Italian reinforcement. Retreat quickly. After all, it is an army of 110,000 people. The momentum of gathering together and the sea of people can be seen from a long distance away. Besides, it's impossible for so many people to gather like this, because as the commander-in-chief, Johannes IV ordered that the army not be allowed to approach the village of Alum. This is the experience of a veteran soldier. As long as you stay in Alum village, you will leave clues. In order to avoid being discovered by the enemy, you should not go here at all. Therefore, after arriving here, the Abyssinian army could only move around it, and no one dared to enter this village. Of course, the villagers of Alum have already left their homes. The war between the two countries has made them forget about the crops in the fields. They have run far away with the only food and livestock they have at home. As the Abyssinians gradually arrived around Alum as their target, the reinforcement led by Major General Pascal were rushing here with difficulty. Cease fire. The leading officer ordered his soldiers to stop firing. Following the officer's order, all soldiers lowered their guns beyond them. The Abyssinian cavalry had fled, leaving only their backs, but they didn't leave nothing behind. More than 20 Abyssinian cavalry fell to the ground. Among them, there is also a warhorse that is trying hard to lift its owner, who fell to the ground, trying to wake him up, but it is doomed to be in vain. The defending Italian army was not without losses. 4 Italian soldiers had been placed here by their comrades in the open space beside them. They were no longer breathing. These are young, awesome guys whose relatively young lives ended here. I just don't know what it will be like when their death notices are delivered to their families. Of course, for the current soldiers, he can't see the future scene yet. The immediate priority is to drive away those Abyssinian cavalry. These Abyssinians on horseback stick to them like candy. No matter how they are driven away, these people will soon appear again. So under the surveillance of these people, every move of the Italian army was under their eyes. In fact, not only the soldiers felt uneasy and irritable about the actions of the Abyssinian cavalry, but also the commander of the team, Major General Pascal, and the commander of the 6th Mountain Brigade, Colonel Zealous, were helpless. How many times is this the attack today? Standing on the high ground behind the troops, Major General Pascal put down his telescope, looked at the sun, and asked the officers around him, "General, this is the 7th time we have been harassed today. This is only the morning, and we have already been harassed for the 7th time. It seems that the Abyssinians are determined to make things difficult for you and me, Major." General Pascal said this to Colonel Zealous beside him, and the commander of the 6th Mountain Brigade also put down his telescope and said, "There are not many methods we can use. The enemy is more familiar with the terrain here than we are, and the enemies are basically cavalry. We don't have a good method." Facing Colonel Zealous' words, Major General Pascal nodded in agreement. "Yes, there are very few methods we can use. More importantly, everyone knows where we are going, which limits our performance. We can only continue along this path, and continue to go down." In fact, both of them didn't say a word, and they tried their best to drive away these cavalry, but in order for this operation to go smoothly, they could not reveal their true situation. Otherwise, the dozens of Maxim machine guns disguised as grain trucks would be enough for these Abyssinian cavalry to drink. However, in order to achieve the goal, the soldiers could only brace themselves to endure the enemy's harassment. Thinking of this, Major General Pascal stopped looking at the high ground. He turned around and gave the order, let the troops continue to leave. We have only walked 6 kilometers today. This is too slow. We must speed up. Following Pascal's order, the stalled Italian army began to move forward again. Its long team looked like a long snake, but Duke Harry knew that this long snake was dangerous. In just 3 days, he lost thousands of riders, which made him feel heartbroken. Sir Marco is back with someone. One of the guards ran to the top of the mountain and reported to Duke Harry, who was observing the Italian army. Let him come up. After hearing the report from the personal guard, Duke Harry turned around and spoke. After a while, a muscular and dark man walked up. This was Marco. I have met the Duke. Facing Marco and saluting, Duke Harry stepped forward to help him up personally. Marco, how did things go? It is ready. I have collected more than 300 cows from other princes and tribes. I have taken them outside the Pal Valley as per your instructions. Very good. Adding the more than 300 we brought ourselves, we have more than 700 cattle, which is enough. What does Duke Harry want to do? In fact, it was nothing. The main reason was that the previous losses were too great, which made the Duke of Hera want to use other methods to replace his cavalry in the battle. The alternative he came up with was to use oxen instead of cavalry and charge at the Italians. However, there are terrain restrictions when using the NIU rushing formation. That is, it must be in a narrow terrain. The Paral Valley is such a place, with mountains on both sides and only one road in it. Some people may want to ask why the cavalry was not ambushed in such terrain and rushed down in one fell swoop to completely defeat the Italians. This kind of situation usually appears in storybooks and novels. Everyone knows that the terrain is dangerous, so when people are sent to investigate in advance and troops are sent to occupy the high ground on both sides, who would just walk like this? Go in. Therefore, it is feasible to use the terrain to ambush a small team, but it is very unrealistic to ambush a large army. Of course, the situation of encirclement is still possible. After all, in this era, no one can push the cordon to more than 10 kilometers on either side. The Italian army was not aware of what the Duke of Hera was doing. So in the afternoon, everyone felt strange when facing the enemy cavalry who never attacked them once. It's not expensive to be weird, but it's still weird. What needs to be in a hurry still needs to be in a hurry. Soon they arrived at a valley terrain. What's the name of this place? The commander, Major General Pascal, looked at the valley whose terrain was very unfavorable to him and asked the guide around him. This is called Pal Valley. If you want to go to Meritha, you need to go here. After hearing the guide's words, Major General Pascal immediately issued the order. Send 2 battalions to occupy the mountains on both sides, and then we will pass. Following Major General Pascal's order, the troops of the 2 battalions climbed up the mountain from both sides. Fortunately, the mountains on both sides were not high, so it only took half an hour after the climbing troops on both sides found nothing. Major General Pascal led his troops into the valley. However, not long after he entered the valley, he immediately heard a rumbling sound. What is this sound? Chapter 142 Steak BBQ. Without letting Major General Pascal think too much, the soldiers in the front started to commotion. At the front, where he couldn't see, the soldiers were hiding to both sides. Fire! Quickly! The order from the officer made the soldiers hiding on both sides pick up their guns and pull the triggers on the charging cattle. Bar! A burst of gunfire rang out, and several of the charging cattle were killed. But this still did not stop the cattle. The leading officer saw this situation and shouted anxiously, keep firing! Keep firing! As for Major General Pascal, who was in the middle of the team, he did not know what happened in the front until a messenger came to report. General, there are a large group of mad cows coming towards this direction. What's the herd size? Faced with Major General Pascal's words, the messenger informed him of what he saw. How come there are cattle rushing into the valley? They are. Brigadier Zealous on the side was very curious. We can't care about this now. We must find a way to stop the cattle to prevent them from causing huge damage to the team. Major General Pascal, anxious in his heart, interrupted Zealous' words. To stop these cattle, we need fences or barriers. Where are we going to find these now? Officer next to him spoke up about his current concerns, but someone else immediately spoke up. You can shoot with a gun. The power of the gun is too weak. It needs to hit the vital part of the cow, and it is very difficult to hit the vital part. An officer whose family owned a farm spoke up about the shortcomings of this approach. So, what should I do now? Seeing the officers facing this situation, some couldn't think of a good way. As the commander, Major General Pascal looked at the machine gun carriage disguised as a grain and grass cart, thought for a while, and then gave up. Wait, carriage. With inspiration in his head, he immediately ordered, pull out the carriage and block the valley. Seeing the obviously stunned expressions of the officers, Pascal roared angrily, quick, why are you standing there? In addition to artillery carts and ammunition carts, there are also grain and grass carts like this. All other vehicles should be pulled over. Pascal was referring to machine gun carriages disguised as forage. Following his order, the officers and soldiers now found the backbone and immediately followed his order and dragged all kinds of carriages over. This is also thanks to the fact that this march took into account various factors and carried a large number of various charged vehicles. After a while, a large number of vehicles piled up and blocked the valley tightly. Of course, being able to give them so much time had a lot to do with the uneven terrain in the valley and the constant shooting of the soldiers in front. The uneven terrain prevented the cattle from running fast, and the soldiers on both sides shot at them, causing the cattle to suffer constant losses. These fallen cattle became obstacles. However, there is still a lack of sufficient means to stop the herd, and the shooting of the soldiers in front can only continuously reduce the size of the herd. When the cattle appeared in front of Pascal and others, the charge of 300 to 400 cattle was still very impressive. Shooting, this time, under the command of Pascal himself, the soldiers kept shooting the crazy cattle because their tails were burned through the obstacles created by the carriages facing the obstacle in front. The cattle went crazy with pain and ran into it. Boom. A carriage carrying tents was knocked away by a mad cow. However, the mad cow that hit the carriage also slowed down. Bang, bang, bang. A series of collisions knocked the said carriage into pieces, but this also caused the forward of the herd to stop. However, although the forward stopped because of the obstruction of the vehicle, the cow behind, who was in pain and lost his mind, did not stop. Then there was another collision, but this time it was the chaotic collision of the cattle themselves. This collision caused the cattle to stop. The Italian officers and soldiers took advantage of this opportunity and kept firing at the huddled cattle with their rifles. There are not many opportunities like this. You must know that the cattle used to be mobile, which was very difficult to shoot, but now they are crowded together, and shooting fixed targets is much more efficient than moving targets. But even though shooting like this is great, there are still some mad cows running around. Get out of the way. An officer yelled at the soldiers who were actually firing at the cattle. The soldier didn't know what was going on, but he immediately felt his body vacate, and then a black cow with red eyes appeared in front of him. At this time, a scream came out of his mouth, but then he couldn't scream anymore. After falling heavily to the ground, he passed out. After seeing his comrade being hit by a mad bull without making any sound, the angry soldier immediately aimed his rifle at the perpetrator. After a burst of fire, the black cow was shot dead at the scene. Of course, situations like this happen from time to time at the scene, but after all, they are animals. How can they be the opponents of humans? In less than 20 minutes, all the cattle were killed. It was only then that Major General Pascal issued the order again. Treat the wounded immediately, count the losses, and send 2 more battalions to reinforce us. We must ensure our safety. As Major General Pascal issued orders one after another, Italian officers and soldiers began to clean up the mess. General, what should we do with these cows? At this time, an officer came and asked. Seeing these dead cows that made a mess of his army, Pascal spat and said, skin all these cows and we'll prepare steaks for the barbecue tonight. At this time, Major General Pascal felt a little scared. If the enemy took advantage of the chaos caused by the cattle to attack his team, he would be in danger. Of course, the attack he was talking about required tens of thousands of people. As for the attack of thousands of people, he was not afraid at all. It was a pity that Duke Harrer only had a few thousand harassing cavalry on hand. Because he was blocked from the valley, he only heard the sound of gunfire and had no idea what was going on inside. Of course, it was not that he had no idea of sending someone in to take a look, but the 2 battalions of Italian troops on the mountain made him give up the idea. There is no use if there are too few people, but if there are too many people, it is doomed to be surrounded. Only a fool would go into the valley to take a look. Well, the Duke of Hera missed his best chance. After the gunfire subsided, he left here with his troops. As for the result, there is no need to look at it. I believe that this cattle attack delayed the Italians for a long time. In the valley, Major General Pascal breathed a sigh of relief when he looked at the casualty figures in front of him. In this cattle attack, not many people died directly, only 57 people, but more than 300 people were injured. In addition, due to blocking the cattle, some supplies were also lost, but fortunately, the loss was not significant. By the time the troops were ready again, the sun was already setting in the west. So shortly after leaving the valley, Major General Pascal could only order the troops to rest. Although after a battle with a mad cow, but in the evening everyone was laughing and laughing, and the aroma of beef wafted over the entire camp. However, as the commander, Major General Pascal had not rested yet. He was looking at the map. Our progress was too slow today, but considering the current situation, we need to speed up the pace. Next. To Major General Pascal, Colonel Zealous was also looking at the map. The terrain we need to pass next will be more difficult. Should we send troops to hold on first? This won't work. Anything less will lead to death, and anything more will distract our strength. But even in this situation, we must go on and try to get to Alum village tomorrow, so that we are close enough to Mera. 2 chapters updated. Please vote and subscribe. Now the subscriptions for each chapter are less than 400, which is too miserable. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143 Battle of Alum, Part 1. The desolate Alum village has become even more desolate due to the lack of people. The crops are left unattended, and the half-dead and half-shabby village has its head lowered. This is all the result of no one watering it yet. Suddenly a team came to this small village, a team of Italian troops. They vigilantly observed the houses in the village and carefully inspected them inside and out. At the same time, the outside of the village was not spared. They checked the ravines, streams, small valleys and other places. After seeing no one, they climbed up the mountain and waved the flags in their hands vigorously. There is no danger in this basin. Let's go. Pascal, who was waiting outside, put down the telescope in his hand and gave the order, and following his order, the team set off again. The previous attack by the cattle in the valley made Pascal more cautious, which also led to his failure to arrive here last night. However, he didn't take it to heart, because the plan was not static, and every commander needed to use it flexibly. But when the team started moving again, the 2 soldiers started chatting. Dole, why are there no Abyssinian cavalry today? These guys are inseparable from us. Boar, shut up. Do you like to see them passing in front of you waving their sabers? The 2 soldiers did not know that in the mountains farther away, in front of a camouflaged dead tree, dozens of Abyssinian soldiers were hiding here, observing the Italian army in the distance. In the hands of one of the leading officers, a telescope that was rare in his army was placed in front of his eye socket to observe every move of the Italian army in the distance. When most of the troops entered the valley, he immediately gave orders to the soldiers around him. Send a message immediately, the enemy has entered. Following his order, the soldiers quickly pushed down the dead tree. As the tree fell to the ground, strange things happened. On other hills, trees fell to the ground one after another. Yes, things like message trees are universal. Such a situation was not observed by the marching Italian army. The Italian army strutting into the basin will soon know the consequences of not observing carefully. Dang. The earth was shaking slightly, and the Italian troops in the basin felt it. What's happening here? Why is the ground shaking? While other soldiers were still confused, the complexion of an experienced veteran changed drastically. No, there is a large group of cavalry coming. The number may exceed 10,000. In fact, there is some discrepancy in the veterans' estimate, because there are more than 10,000 and 20,000 Abyssinian cavalry are rushing towards this direction in an overwhelming force. The 2 battalions of officers and soldiers on guard duty on the mountain were staring dumbfoundedly at the sudden appearance of the enemy. They couldn't figure out where this enemy suddenly appeared from. In fact, these cavalrymen were hiding in a mountain col next to them. The low terrain here just blocked the visits of people on the mountain. This was the location chosen by Johannes IV after repeated experiments, because this battle was related to his success or failure. There was no room for failure, so he needed to go all out from the beginning. For this reason, he mobilized all the cavalry and organized this raid with the cavalry taking the lead. In addition to the cavalry, larger infantrymen emerged from all around. These infantrymen armed with various weapons rushed towards the basin from all directions. Enemy attack. The sentries sent the news of the enemy's attack. In fact, the army already knew it without him saying anything. Such a massive attack could be felt by anyone who was not dead. As the commander of the force, Major General Pascal responded immediately. Gather the machine gun carriages to the front and prioritize the enemy's cavalry. The mountain brigade immediately prepares to go up the mountain to block the enemy's incoming infantry. The artillery troops immediately go to the rear. The 4th Regiment quickly builds positions to prepare for the impact of the enemy's cavalry. Also, immediately let the rear guard send someone to inform General Simeon that our army is under siege by the enemy's main force and request support. After issuing a series of orders, Major General Pascal's hanging heart finally calmed down. He is not afraid of the enemy's large-scale attack, but the small-scale harassment is a headache, because this small-scale attack not only makes the troops stop and go, wasting time, but also keeps the soldiers on high alert. It will increase the psychological pressure of soldiers now. Even though they are being raided, they can still use their firepower advantage. So who has the advantage needs to look at the performance on the battlefield. Following Major General Pascal's order, the machine gun carriage disguised as food and grass removed its cover, revealing the cold murder weapon. The operating soldier hid behind a baffle made of steel plates, with only his head exposed. These machine gun carriages immediately gathered forward, and the firepower network composed of more than 40 Maxim machine guns was bound to impress the enemy. They were not asked to wait any longer. Just as they were setting up their positions, the Abyssinian cavalry appeared in front of them. Although the 2 battalions on the mountain fired at them desperately, it was not that easy to defeat the fast-moving enemy, let alone they were so far away. Except for more than 20 unlucky guys, no one else was lost. When these Abyssinian cavalry saw the Italian army appearing in front of them, they shouted and planned to attack with the most lethal cavalry. From here we can see the advanced nature of Simeon's use of carriages to install machine guns. If it weren't for these machine guns mounted on carriages and those machine guns that used wheels to maneuver, a disaster would be right around the corner. Fire. The commander responsible for directing the battle immediately gave the order to fire after seeing the enemy cavalry approaching. Following the commander's order, the Maxim machine guns deployed in a semicircle burst out with unparalleled power. More than 40 tongues of fire let the incoming cavalry know what hell is on earth. Countless tongues of fire engulfed these brave Abyssinian cavalry, and they were mopped down in pieces by the ferocious firepower in front of the cold killing machine. The group charge of the Abyssinian cavalry was completely defeated. Facing his own cavalry being suppressed by the enemy's powerful firepower, the Abyssinian cavalry commander leading the team shouted with red eyes, "Charge, keep charging, don't stop, don't stop." In fact, there is no need for him to say it. Every cavalryman knows that, as long as the speed of large-scale charge increases, no one dares to slow down. Because the enemy's bullets may not necessarily kill you, but as long as you slow down, the comrades charging behind you will definitely kill you without any body parts. With thousands of horses galloping, everyone must ensure their speed. In some respects, it is no wonder that the Abyssinians were able to dominate East Africa with more than 20,000 well-trained cavalry. It's just that today was a disaster for this cavalry. The warriors who came one after another had no chance to rush in front of the enemy. They fell on the charging road one after another, but their sacrifices were not without effect. In front of a machine gun with empty ammunition emitting white steam, the main shooter shouted to the deputy shooter next to him. "Quick, change the bomb." The deputy shooter quickly removed the empty ammunition box and threw it aside. Next to it was an empty ammunition box on the ground. Then he quickly picked up an iron box full of ammunition and loaded it. The main shooter picked up the canvas bullet chain and loaded it with a snap. Then machine gun fire rang out again. On the battlefield, such situations can be seen everywhere. After all, Maxim is a big consumer of bullets, and the 150 round bullet chain he uses can only last for 20 seconds. Unfortunately, the Maxim machine gun is water cooled. If it were an air cooled machine gun, faced with such a situation, it would be impossible to withstand the assault of the incoming cavalry. But even so, there were still calls from the battlefield. "Quick, I don't have much ammunition here. I need ammunition supplies. Where's the cooling water? Get it quickly." Even busier than the main and auxiliary shooters are the logistics troops, who need to meet all their requirements now. These more than 40 machine guns are what the Italians rely on. As for the Abyssinian cavalry, if they wanted to rush into the Italian army and cause massacre, they needed to get past the machine gun position. It's like going to the bull's head. It depends on who can't hold on first. Whether the Abyssinians use their lives to build a path and fight to the front of the position, or whether the Italian machine guns crushed the enemy, it all depends on the performance of both parties. As the fighting became more and more intense, the casualties of the Abyssinians skyrocketed, and the Italian machine guns on the position were not unscathed. With a click sound, a machine gun misfired due to damage to its parts due to excess of use. This made the main and auxiliary shooters jump in panic. They tried several times against the hot machine gun, but the machine gun just didn't respond. What to do? Quick fix. However, if you want to repair weapons on the battlefield, you need a big heart. Facing the overwhelming cavalry in front of them, the two of them fiddled with it for a long time to no avail. To get it back to work. This is not a special case. As time goes by, problems arise one after another with machine guns that keep firing. Ultimately, this is because the early Maxim machine guns were not stable enough, but this problem is really fatal for current Italian officers and soldiers. However, compared with the Italian officers and soldiers, the Abyssinian cavalry was even more miserable. The constant charging caused them to fall in pieces in front of the position. The corpses of their men and horses became new roadblocks, making it impossible for the cavalry behind them to charge up. Such a tragedy also greatly damaged their morale, and their indomitable momentum was also weakened. Many cavalry were already very hesitant when charging. Boom. Boom boom. At this time, the Italian artillery was finally set up, and this became the last straw. The Abyssinian cavalry could no longer maintain their morale, and they retreated to the rear. The commander who led the team could only give an order helplessly when seeing such a scene. Retreat. In this short-lived battle between cavalry and machine guns, the Abyssinians understood with their own flesh and blood that the cavalry could not charge against the machine gun positions. However, the price of this truth is too staggering. In order to understand this truth, the Abyssinian cavalry suffered losses of nearly 6,000. After seeing the machine gun repulse the enemy cavalry, the commander, Major General Pascal, did not have time to rejoice, and immediately gave the order. Immediately move the machine guns that can still be used up the mountain. The enemy over there is coming soon. Please subscribe, ask for recommendations, and ask for monthly votes. Cross out not asking for monthly votes. Chapter 144 Battle of Alum, Part 2. Major General Pascal's concerns are very accurate. Colonel Zealous of the 6th Mountain Brigade on the top of the mountain looked at the Abyssinians with an ugly expression. They were holding various weapons and rushing towards the hilltop, where the 6th Mountain Brigade was holding firm point behind these Abyssinians. Some people appeared pushing artillery, which made Colonel Zealous look even more ugly. On this uncovered hilltop, his 6th Mountain Brigade had no fortifications. Anyone can understand the feeling of being hit by artillery fire a few times. Fortunately, after repelling the enemy's cavalry attack, machine guns and artillery were finally able to support themselves. Of course, if they want their support, the officers and soldiers of the 6th Mountain Brigade will need to work hard to block the enemy point. Seeing that the enemy was getting closer and closer, Zealous, the brigade commander, roared, "Open fire and drive these Abyssinians down." Following his order, the officers and soldiers of the 6th Mountain Brigade relied on the terrain to cover themselves, raised their guns, and put each Abyssinian soldier into the crosses. The 6th Mountain Brigade is indeed an elite unit from the Northern Mountain operations. The accuracy of its rifles is commendable. The attacking Abyssinians were blocked and unable to lift their heads due to the firepower on the mountain point. Here, an Abyssinian soldier who was trying to climb a mountain reached out and grabbed a stone, but nothing happened. A young Abyssinian soldier was lying on the ground, his butt raised above his head. He raised the rifle in his hand, pointed it tremblingly in the direction of the mountain, and pulled the trigger with his eyes closed. Of course, these scenes are just a corner of the battlefield. Most of the Abyssinian soldiers are more at a loss when facing such a hail of bullets. They lack training and don't know how to deal with this situation. Some people may ask, where are their officers? Speaking of which, there is not much difference between them. Many of these officers were just soldiers before. They expanded the army crazily, allowing these soldiers who only knew orders to get promotion opportunities and become basic officers who led the soldiers. However, faced with such an unsatisfactory situation, these basic officers turned their attention to their superiors. "Look at what I'm doing. Attack and charge forward." Not long after they were transformed from low-level officers to mid-level officers, their superiors angrily issued their orders. However, his order was very wrong. The 6th Mountain Brigade showed enough respect to this wave of Abyssinian soldiers who suddenly appeared and dared to continue the attack. So more firepower was given to them to let them know that they would charge despite the enemy's bullets, unless there was a bullet. Be fearless, otherwise it is best not to use this method. Faced with the failure of the attack, Emperor Johannes IV, who was watching the battle from behind, was anxious in his heart. The news that the previous cavalry raid failed made him want to vomit blood. The elite cavalry force has always been the most powerful force in the hands of him and other princes and nobles. This time he suffered a heavy blow from the enemy. How could he not be angry? More importantly, the cavalry did not achieve the purpose of destroying the enemy's artillery and also caused the loss of 6,000 troops. Who knows how difficult it will be for the Italian army, which is full of firepower. But now for Johannes IV, he is already riding a tiger. Suffering such a big loss, if he cannot win a victory, his position as emperor will be shaken. Even if the Italians don't fight, other princes and nobles will not let him go. Therefore, with no way out, he could only hope to take down these Italians by using superior forces 10 times that of the enemy. As long as he can capture this Italian force, he will still be the wise and mighty emperor and will still be respected by the princes and nobles. Order the artillery to open fire and hit those Italians hard. After seeing that the artillery was ready, Johannes IV looked at the fierce battle ahead and issued his first order. After arriving on the battlefield, boom, 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 these artillery pieces sent by the British and French efforts finally achieved their wish and launched a fierce bombardment on the defending 6th Mountain Brigade point. Although the artillery skills of these urgently trained artillery were poor, the accuracy of the artillery shells was not high, and as many of them fell on their own heads as those of the enemy. But this did suppress the firepower of the 6th Brigade and allowed the attacking soldiers to prepare to attack again. Of course, this required ignoring the greetings from friendly forces that might fall on them. Attack. Quick, everyone get up and attack. The officer leading the team shouted and ordered the soldiers to rise up and attack. The continuous kicks and beatings from the officers finally made these soldiers get up. They took various guns sent by Britain and France and attacked the hilltop. Quickly put down the enemy's offensive. The Italian officers defending on the hilltop saw that the enemy was ready to move again and quickly ordered the soldiers to increase the output of firepower to suppress the enemy's momentum. For them to enter hand-to-hand combat would represent failure. Look at the number of enemies at the foot of the mountain and look at your own number. If you really want to engage in hand-to-hand combat, the result will be self-evident. Therefore, for their own honor and for their own lives, Italian officers and soldiers must stop the enemy from thinking. However, although the Italian army desperately tried to hold off the enemy's shelling did interfere with their shooting. After all, it is indeed difficult for these officers and soldiers to withstand the danger of shells exploding around them and still shoot steadily at the incoming enemy's calmly point. Fortunately, the support firepower from Major General Pascal, who had just finished the duel with the cavalry, finally caught up. The Maxim machine gun is indeed a powerful defensive weapon. Although there were not many machine guns brought up this time, its ferocious firepower immediately suppressed the momentum of the attacking Abyssinian soldiers facing the enemy's machine guns. Of course, the Abyssinian artillerymen at the foot of the mountain would not let them go, and immediately concentrated their firepower on these machine guns that emerged. Well, artillery is indeed the nemesis of machine guns. Facing enemy artillery fire, the machine guns that were so menacing just now suddenly withered. Although the Abyssinian artillery is not good enough, artillery has a farther range than machine guns. How should we fight this kind of battle, where we cannot fight back? But just as they were running away, the artillery from the Italian side, which had been transported up the mountain with great difficulty, arrived. Although these are only some light artillery, they occupy the terrain advantage, and are still more threatening to the enemy. Boom. 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 The shelling from the top of the mountain made the unscrupulous opponents restrain themselves. The high-level shelling from Europe taught beginners like the Abyssinians a good lesson. Boom. 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 A shell fell into the Abyssinian artillery position, and the violent explosion set off a chain reaction that destroyed several cannons. This result scared the Abyssinian artillery and quickly moved their positions. They are no more expensive in Italy. These artillery pieces cost money to import. As machine guns and artillery moved up the mountain, the Abyssinians launched several subsequent attacks, only to be repulsed. Johannesforth looked at the top of the mountain that was still firmly in the hands of the Italians, and he knew that his desire to capture the top of the mountain in one fell swoop was shattered. But then, he needs to swamp his opponent with a sea of people. Posted late. Some apologies. There are only 2 chapters today. Please vote for me. Please vote for recommendations. There are too few. I don't ask for monthly votes. I have accumulated 1 chapter of monthly votes, plus the 2 chapters I owe to the Sultan. It's 3 chapters. Definitely not asking for a monthly ticket. Chapter 145, Battle of Alum, Part 2. The sun rises again, and a new day begins. But for the 2 sides fighting in Alum, the arrival of this new day means that the battle is about to begin. At the foot of the mountain, the Abyssinians, led by priests and patriarchs, were performing their last prayers before the war. Judging from their pious expressions and meticulous actions, the Orthodox Church has a high prestige in the local area. While the Abyssinians were preparing to pray before the battle, the Italian troops on the mountain were not idle either. They continued to reinforce their trenches with shovels and other tools in their hands. Yesterday's battle made Italian officers and soldiers feel the pain of not having a bunker, so after the battle, they repaired a trench overnight. This is also thanks to the fact that they took into account the possibility of being attacked by the enemy when they set out, so they brought a large number of digging tools with them. The time for the Abyssinians to pray soon passed, and as the sun gradually rose in the sky, the 2 prepared parties began another day of fighting. Boom. 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 The artillery was the first to speak. The Abyssinian artillery from down the mountain fired a bombardment at the Italian position on the mountain. Boom. 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 The 6th Mountain Brigade that was stationed on the mountain was not free of charge. Facing the enemy's shelling, the Italian army, which also carried a large number of artillery, also began to counterattack. A fierce artillery battle broke out between the artillery of the 2 sides. While the artillery was dueling, the Abyssinian infantry was not idle either. Under the leadership of their officers, they launched an attack on the mountain. Tens of thousands of Abyssinians, armed with their own weapons, bent over towards the top of the mountain. The enemy is coming. Prepare. The junior officers who were lying on the ground observing immediately called their soldiers to prepare for battle. When they saw the enemy approaching. From the air above the battlefield, Italian officers and soldiers formed a circular position, surrounded by a large number of Abyssinians. It was not until these Abyssinian officers and soldiers entered the firing range of 300 to 400 meters that the firepower from the position began to fire. Intensive firepower hit the attacking Abyssinian officers and soldiers. The Abyssinians, who were at a disadvantage due to the attack, each used the terrain to hide their figures, and also used their rifles to fight back. Quick shot. The officers were constantly in the trenches, directing the soldiers to fire, while observing the situation on the battlefield. Wherever the enemy appears, he is responsible for commanding the soldiers to suppress it. Bang. An Italian soldier lying in the trench looked at a low-level officer who was directing the soldiers to attack, and pulled the trigger. I saw the Abyssinian officer waving his arms, with a trail of blood on his chest, and he fell heavily to the ground. And the morale of the Abyssinian soldiers around him, that had just been boosted, dropped back, snapped. There was a gunshot, and an Abyssinian soldier who emerged was hit. There was blood on his shoulder, and he screamed in pain. However, on the battlefield, although the defending Italian army had a terrain advantage, the Abyssinians had an absolute numerical advantage. Moreover, the guns and ammunition strongly supported by Britain and France are not vegetarian. Snapped. An Abyssinian soldier hiding behind a boulder aimed his rifle at an Italian soldier who was shooting. He gently pulled the trigger, and the gunpowder pushed the projectile out of the gun chamber and hit him hard. The Italian soldier who was hit let out a heart-rending cry, causing his comrades to drag him behind the position. Here, the medical soldiers wearing Red Cross armbands are checking his injuries, and then decide whether to send him to a field hospital in the rear or treat him on the spot. If there is much difference between the Italian army and the Abyssinian army, then the medical soldiers are definitely the biggest difference. Whether it is equipment or training, it can be outsourced or trained by military consultants, but it is not possible to have such medical soldiers. Although this type of military unit that requires professional medical care may seem inconspicuous, it can really greatly improve the morale of the army. Because for soldiers, the difference between knowing whether they are injured or not is very big. This is also one of the important symbols of a modernized army. Having medical soldiers who can save lives and heal the wounded is a thing that makes both officers and soldiers feel at ease. As for Abyssinia, it is estimated that there will be no more than 3 digits of people who know the word medic, so for them, the only way to survive the injury is to toughen up, and of course there will be blessings from the priests. As for whether you can survive, in addition to relying on yourself, it depends on God's will. On the battlefield, the defenders continued to reduce the number of attacking troops, but they also suffered a certain amount of casualties. Although this number was inconspicuous, it could not be ignored. But in the end, it was the Italian army that relied on its own equipment and technical and tactical advantages to drive away this wave of Abyssinians. However, as the Abyssinian Emperor Johannes IV, he would not give them any time to rest. With a wave of his hand, another troop roared and attacked the mountain. This Johannes IV took advantage of their humancy to the extreme. He divided his troops into 5 troops and let them take turns to attack the defenders facing the successive attacks of Johannes IV. The Italian officers and soldiers who could not get any rest could only grit their teeth and persist. However, as its commander, Major General Pascal would not just watch his troops be attacked by the enemy in turn. He also rotated the troops to take a rest, but only 1 or 2 battalions could be mobilized to take a rest, and it would take a short period of time after repelling the enemy's attack. Basically, each battalion can have more than an hour of rest time. Although it is not worth mentioning compared with the Abyssinians, this is really his only way. You must know that there are too many enemies, and he does not dare to let too many people rest. Of course, the Abyssinians' successive attacks had little effect at first, because at this time the Italian army was full of energy and could respond quickly. However, by the afternoon, the soldiers who had gone through high-intensity fighting all morning were already exhausted. Although it seems that soldiers only need to be on the battlefield, lying down in the trenches, and pulling the trigger, but in this process, they need to observe the enemy's movements at any time, and at the same time, they need to mainly avoid possible dangers, in addition to the roar of injured comrades and the explosion of artillery shells etc., need to be excluded. These will make the soldiers highly nervous, and it is very tiring to maintain such a state. Therefore, many times a soldier cannot fight for a whole day, and they also need to take a rest. However, in the Battle of Alum, the soldiers who lacked replacements could only grit their teeth and persevere. As the commander, Major General Pascal could temporarily replace a small number of officers and soldiers to rest, but this could not relieve the mental pressure of the officers and soldiers at all points. So in the afternoon, the Abyssinians were once 50 meters close to the position, and they could overtake them with a single charge. This forced Major General Pascal to temporarily terminate the small-scale rotation and let the officers and soldiers block this wave of attacks. The day's attack by the Abyssinians was not over until the sun went down. Although the Abyssinian casualties on this day were as high as about 11,000, the officers in charge saw the enemy's fatigue. If Abyssinians had not suffered from too much night blindness, someone might have suggested night fighting. On the other side of the position, the Italian officers and soldiers who had repelled the Abyssinian attack were slumped in the position, wishing they could have a good sleep right away. However, the officer would not let them rest like this. They needed to eat first, and then rest in a safe place. Moreover, they are busier than the soldiers. They need to count casualties, weapon losses, and whether ammunition is sufficient. As for Major General Pascal, the commander, he sighed after looking at the statistics. This is not to say that the number of casualties was too high. In this day's battle, the Italian army suffered less than 800 casualties. Although it looked good, Major General Pascal knew that, if he suffered from such fighting for a few days, he might not be able to wait for General Simeon's reinforcement. We cannot continue to fight like this. We need to reduce our defensive area and allow our soldiers to get adequate rest. A battle like this today cannot continue. Colonel Zealous, who was also worried about the future war, asked, "Then what do you want to do?" "We need to be ready to abandon the hills to the west." Faced with zealous inquiry, Major General Pascal expressed his inner thoughts. The hills to the west are much shorter than those to the east, so for military purposes, Major General Pascal chose to give up. Is this too hasty? Faced with Major General Pascal's words, Colonel Zealous asked. This was not because he was opposed to abandoning the hills to the west, but if he retreated too early, the enemy's morale would be greatly increased, and his silent abandonment of the defended hills would also demoralize the officers and soldiers below. Let's do this. Gather all the main supplies and carriages here. If you can defend the west side, defend it. If you can't, retreat back. After thinking about it, Major General Pascal decided to take it slow, but a lot of work that needed to be prepared in advance could be started. Of course, for the two of them, the best solution is General Simeon's reinforcement. Speaking of Simeon's reinforcement, is the general ready? Chapter 146 Reinforcement. What is General Simeon doing? In fact, since Major General Pascal set off with the support troops, he has been preparing to send troops. In order to prepare for the speed of dispatching troops this time, he did not carry too many other supplies. Basically, except for ammunition and food, he brought as little other supplies as possible. But this alone was not enough. In order to avoid harassment from the enemy's cavalry, he also summoned the local Quirinal elders and asked them to send troops to assist him. As a reward for sending troops, he made a decision for the colonial government. As long as the local Quirinal tribe sent cavalry to support themselves, the government would no longer collect a head tax of 8 lire per person per year from their tribe. Do you feel like the money is very little? Don't think it's less. It's a good thing for the barren local tribes of Eritrea, because this tax is not small, and it adds up to a large amount every year. In addition, it also means that it can handle things well with the Italian authorities. Of course, if you want to get the benefits of Simeon, each tribe needs to make a strong effort. Simeon also had requirements for tribes to send troops. According to the population of each tribe, troops were allocated at a ratio of 14:1. This is after deducting the elderly, children and women. Basically, the ratio is 2:1, which is a relatively harsh draw. Of course, being ruthless is not enough. Simeon also has a benevolent side. As long as they bring their own horses, equipment, weapons, and food, they can provide them themselves. A steady stream of grain and grass purchased from various places was constantly transported from the Massawa port, allowing Simone to provide support to these mobilized indigenous warriors. Of course, although Simeon didn't say what the result would be, if he didn't want to, he would know it with his knees. Therefore, few tribes dared to disobey his orders within the stipulated time. Warriors from various tribes rushed to Adiquera with their horses. The indigenous cavalry of 24,000 people made the already crowded Quirinal even more crowded point, but these were all trivial matters. The main reason was that these tribal warriors were used to being undisciplined and started causing trouble everywhere. Simone arranged for the military police to arrest a few of those who made too much trouble and borrowed their heads to calm them down. Then he called the leaders of each tribe and asked them to control their subordinates, otherwise the Italian army would manage them on their behalf. So under the suppression of these leaders, these indigenous cavalry finally looked decent. At this time, the message for help from Major General Pascal finally arrived. Simeon, who had been waiting for the news, immediately ordered the indigenous cavalry to clear the way, and his army then advanced. Sometimes I have to admit that the local Eritrean tribal cavalry is a good way to deal with the harassment of the Abyssinian army. In front of 24,000 indigenous cavalry, the small-scale Abyssinian cavalry had no way to deal with them. They were all driven far away, unable to get close to Simeon and the main force. It was precisely with the protection of the indigenous cavalry that Simeon's troops were very fast, not as slow as the previous two times. They arrived in less than 2 days before Major General Pascal was attacked by the Fireball formation in the Pear Valley. Now he is less than 15 kilometers away from Major General Pascal, who is surrounded. Almost a day's journey. Facing Simone's reinforcement, the one who was most surprised was the Abyssinian Emperor Johannes IV. You said enemy reinforcement are almost here. In front of Johannes IV, an Abyssinian warrior dressed as a cavalryman lowered his head and answered, "Your Majesty, yes. Our troops can't get close to the Italian army at all, so we can't delay their march at all. Those Tigrinian traitors are helping the Italians fight us." Hearing this news, Johannes IV and the princes and nobles present had differences on whether to continue the attack on Alum. "We should retreat, since the enemy's large forces are coming. Continuing to fight will put everyone in danger." A prince expressed his opinion. "This won't work. If we just give up like this, then wouldn't the soldiers we sacrificed die in vain? We must know that we have lost more than 30,000 people in order to fight the Italians trapped in Alum. What should we do with the losses of these people? Question mark. How do you want the people to think of us if we retreat like this without any results?" A disgraced prince expressed his dissent. Of course, they did not say that their troops had suffered losses of up to 4 levels due to the previous battle and were already injured. If they retreated like this, how could they suppress the dissatisfaction of the troops? What's more important is that he belongs to the group of people who suffered heavier casualties, and of course he can't stand the princes who suffered smaller losses. This is to avoid causing greater losses. Otherwise, when the Italian reinforcement arrive, we will not be able to retreat, even if we want to. Such an explanation did not satisfy him, so he saw the fighting palace speak. "Our difficult enemy is even more difficult. Didn't you see that the enemy has retreated to only guarding one hilltop? Moreover, in the past few days of fighting, those Italians have also suffered heavy losses. As long as we use our strength, we will definitely be able to defeat them. At that time, I would not object to retreat at all. I also know that the enemy's losses are too great. If we attack a few more times, we will definitely be able to capture it. However, this is not because the enemy's reinforcement are coming soon. It is too dangerous. I don't think it's worth it for this goal." "Why is it not worth it? There is no battle that is not dangerous. Seeing that the enemy is almost finished, what do you mean by retreating? Are you planning to make good friends with the Italians and leave yourself a way out? How do you talk? That's how I talk. Okay, everyone, stop." The voice from Johannes IV suppressed the dispute between the two princes. However, although he suppressed the dispute between the two, it could be seen from their eyes that they were still very unconvinced. "Both of your suggestions are for everyone's consideration, but they have different ideas. I have decided to attack for another day tomorrow. If I can't hold on anymore, I will retreat immediately." The order from Johannes IV left everyone speechless. They could only accept His Majesty's order, and the meeting ended like this for Johannes IV. Reinforcement from Simeon were definitely no less harmful to him than other princes. Because this battle was decided by himself, if he could not produce a convincing result, the princes and nobles who had suffered huge losses would definitely leave him. Then he, the unconvincing emperor of Abyssinia, will follow in the footsteps of his predecessor. To address the emperor faced the British attack completely alone, so he died in Magdala in the end. This was the revenge of other princes and nobles for Tuadris II, who only knew how to brutally squeeze them. Following the lessons of the previous emperor, Johannes IV would mainly rely on winovers and always ensure that the princes and nobles were on his side. But now facing Alam, who had never been able to win, how could he lead the Abyssinian army to evacuate with heavy losses? So he could only bite the bullet and try again. No matter what, he had to achieve some results, so whether the next step is to fight or flee will be decided tomorrow. Major General Pascal, who was on the top of the mountain, was also looking at the Abyssinian military camp down the mountain. He had suffered enough losses and needed the support of General Simeon. Don't worry, book friends who are waiting, the war will be over soon. Chapter 147 Route. A new day begins, and the battle in Alam also begins as scheduled. However, today is obviously different from the past. Abyssinia's attack is more fierce, and it has no intention of retreating at all. It is completely determined to fight to the death point. If it weren't for the dissuasion from the Maxim machine guns, the Abyssinians would have rushed up with a sea of people. Despite the casualties facing the Abyssinian attack, the Italian officers and soldiers serving as defenders felt incredible. What's wrong with these Abyssinians? Why are they so desperate? As the commander of the 6th Mountain Brigade, Zealous couldn't help but ask when he saw his men struggling to hold on under the Abyssinian offensive. What else can there be? General Simeon's reinforcement must be arriving soon, and these Abyssinians want to make a profit. Major General Pascal, who walked behind him, expressed his judgment. The commander of the 8th Division didn't seem to be in good condition, with a tired look on his face and bloodshot eyes, but he was in high spirits now. After taking a look at the attacking Abyssinian army, he turned to Zealous and asked, "Can the 6th Brigade withstand this enemy offensive?" Hearing that the reinforcement were coming, Colonel Zealous, who wanted to gain more credit on the battlefield, said with a serious face, "Okay, I will let the officers and soldiers of the Mountain Brigade block the enemy. Well, I will tell the artillery not to save shells, and they will fully support you." Yes, both men were betting that the army led by General Simeon was not far away from them. Because if this is not the case, then how can one explain the enemy's desperate attempt to seize their position? Because of this, Major General Pascal no longer hesitated and directly took out all his belongings to have a good fight with the enemy. Major General Pascal's words greatly increased Zealous' confidence. Because he had to save artillery shells, he could not suppress the enemy's artillery. This put a lot of pressure on the defending Mountain Brigade. As long as there is no enemy artillery support, the offensive of these Abyssinians is nothing to worry about. The good days of the Abyssinian artillery were over as Major General Pascal allowed the artillery to fire freely. Due to the terrain and training level, the Italian defenders' artillery units were able to threaten all Abyssinian artillery positions. Boom. 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 The shelling from the top of the mountain made it impossible for the Abyssinian artillery to suppress the defenders' position. This artillery battle was very different from the previous ones. Both sides were not trying to evade, but were completely aiming to kill 1,000 enemies at the expense of 800. So a rare scene happened on the battlefield. The artillery positions on both sides were continuously destroyed, but they all agreed not to evacuate. One side relies on the advantage of large numbers, and the other side takes advantage of its own technology. While the artillery of the two sides was destroying each other, the battle on the position was still fierce. There was no retreat this time. One unit could not withstand it any longer. Immediately another unit took over and charged with them. There was a firing squad standing in front of the position at the foot of the mountain. Anyone who retreated would be shot to death. The strict orders from military law made all Abyssinians aware of the harsh consequences of retreating and dying. Unable to be forced into a desperate situation, these East African warriors burst out with a final roar and rushed forward to the position. Faced with this death-defying outbreak, the defenders of the position could no longer bear it. They watched as these Abyssinians gradually approached the position despite their casualties. 100 meters, 50 meters, 20 meters. Then there was a burst of cheers, and the Abyssinians rushed to the position and fought at close range with the officers and soldiers of the 6th Mountain Brigade. Well done. I want to congratulate the first brave man to charge forward. I want to make him ennoble. At the foot of the mountain, Johannes IV looked at his own troops who had attacked the position. He was overjoyed, and even offered a noble title as a generous reward. You must know that the nobility of Abyssinia is closer to the Middle Ages. It has its own fiefdom, annual revenue, and army. It is completely a small independent kingdom. After saying that he wanted a heavy reward, Johannes IV immediately put down all bets. Follow the reinforcement and deal with the enemy. Since the Abyssinians were so happy, things were terrible on the Italian side. Quickly organize everyone to pick up weapons and reinforce the position. Seeing the enemy attack the position, Major General Pascal immediately ordered all those who could take up arms to take the position. But even so, the 4 balls in his hand were still tightly squeezed. On the position facing the attacking Abyssinians, the Italian defenders drew their bayonets and engaged in hand-to-hand combat, trying to drive the enemies out of the position. A brutal fight unfolded on the battlefield, and the desperate fight between officers and soldiers from both sides made the scene even bloodier. Now the eyes of both parties are focused on the top of the mountain, waiting for the result. However, they did not notice that there was movement on the edge of the battlefield. Not to mention that no one noticed that several Abyssinian cavalrymen came over with blood on their bodies, fighting hard. What did you say? With a shocked expression on his face, Johannes IV looked at the cavalry reporting the news in front of him, his eyes showing an expression of reluctance. Although the cavalryman who reported the news did not want to offend the emperor in front of him, he still had to bite the bullet and repeat it again. Your Majesty, the enemy has broken through Duke Heir's obstruction and is coming here. The atmosphere at the scene was extremely depressing. Everyone present knew that this was bad, and it was too late to retreat. Johannes IV said with a frustrated look, waving his hands. Let the troops stand down. Following the order of Johannes IV, the sound of retreating horns made the two parties fighting on the top of the mountain feel incredible. But at this time, a defender who reacted quickly shouted, "Our reinforcement are coming. Reinforcement are coming." This sentence greatly boosted the morale of the defenders, and even made the Abyssinians who had attacked before look as hen. He didn't care about fighting with the defenders on the position, and ran down the mountain in a hurry. But it was a little late for them to go down the mountain now, because in the distance, the smoke and dust brought by the large-scale army march have appeared. The figures of the indigenous cavalry at the front were already looming, which meant that reinforcement would appear on the battlefield in less than half an hour. Faced with this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Major General Pascal took out his last trump card. The 4th Regiment attacks to hold the enemy back and not let them escape. Following Major General Pascal's order, nearly 2,000 Italian troops who were recharged burst out with endless fighting power. They chased the enemy's retreat and rushed over. The attack of the 4th Regiment was like the last straw that broke the camel's back, causing the Abyssinians who had just retreated to collapse. It was like a snowball, getting bigger and bigger, and was about to spread to the entire battlefield. At this time, Johannes IV, the Emperor of Abyssinia, made a surprising decision. You guys should retreat with your troops. I'll stay behind to break up the rear. Emperor, think twice. His Majesty facing the dissuaded prince, Johannes IV waved his hand to stop him and continued to speak. You retreat first. If I die in battle, let Menelik take over. Let me end the fight with the Italians. After saying these words, Johannes IV gave the final order. Order the Imperial Guard to come over immediately and prepare to fight with the Emperor. Johannes IV's Praetorian Guard was his most loyal force. The more than 10,000 Praetorian Guards were the best in terms of training and equipment. This was also the core force of Johannes IV to suppress the entire empire. But today, he needs to use this unit to block the enemy and win a way for other units to survive. Because he knew that someone must be responsible for this defeat, and no one except him, the Emperor, could bear the responsibility for such a loss. So Johannes IV and his Praetorian Guards became the anchor of stability for the retreating Abyssinian officers and soldiers, gradually calming down the already ongoing defeat. It's just that the army led by Simone has appeared in front of him, making it impossible for the emperor's guards to leave point. The old emperor pulled out his sword and loudly gave orders to his guards. P-R-A-T-O-R-I-A-N. Guards, advance. Chapter 148 Summation. Johannes IV is dead. He died during a battle with Italian troops when a bullet struck him in the chest, causing him to fall off his horse and die. Point as the king of Showa, Menelik learned the news immediately. Ah, you sure you saw it clearly? In the military camp outside Mera, Menelik asked the visitor. Yes, I used the telescope His Highness gave me to see clearly. Emperor Johannes was indeed killed in battle. His Praetorian guards and he were surrounded and eliminated by the Italians. No one escaped. Then, you go down and rest. After sending the people away, Menelik called an attendant to give instructions. Invite Duke Haile Selassie to come over and tell him that I have something to discuss with him. As you command, Your Highness. After asking the attendant to invite his son-in-law and brother-in-law, Menelik called for a confidant. After muttering a few words in a low voice, the confidant left immediately with his orders. After a while, the only son of Johannes IV, Duke Haile Selassie, came to the big tent. Is there anything, King Menelik? There is no way. I really don't know what to call the relationship between the two, so I can only call it by title. Duke Selassie, I have a very urgent matter to discuss with you this time. In the big tent, Menelik said to him with a serious expression. What's up? Facing the serious looking Menelik, Haile Selassie's heart tightened, thinking of the battlefield not far away. Is there any news from my father? Yes, I just got the news that your father, the great Johannes IV, was killed in a battle with the Italians just now. Menelik's words made Haile Selassie open his eyes wide, and he looked at the Lord of Showa in front of him with disbelief. You lied to me, right? Say, you are kidding me. Looking at the silent Menelik, Haile Selassie's heart fell to the bottom, and she sat on the ground and cried. Please. Grief. Menelik looked at Haile Selassie, who was losing his temper, and then called two guards. Take Duke Haile Selassie to rest and give him everything he needs, except not letting him out. Menelik's words caused the two guards to tightly grasp the arms of Duke Selassie. Let me go. Let me go. What are you doing? Duke Selassie, who struggled desperately, could not break free from the control of the two men. He could only see his eyes fixed on Menelik. This is what you want? Seeing my father killed in battle, you can't wait to be the emperor? Faced with Duke Selassie's nonsense, Menelik did not refute. He walked up to him and spoke. This is not what I want to see, but now that it has failed, changes must be made. I don't want more people to die in this war. This is not only my decision, but also your father's idea, otherwise he will not stay calm down and face the Italians alone. After finishing speaking, Menelik waved his hand and asked the guards to take him down. Point at this time, a confidant on the side walked up to Menelik and made a singing gesture. No, I don't want his life, and I don't want Zodatu to lose her husband. I just want him to be quiet. This is also to preserve his family. This is what I promised Emperor Johannes, and I can't break my promise. Menelik's words made his confidant lower his head, bowed and left quietly. Point yes, Menelik wanted peace talks. To say peace talks may be a bit embarrassing, and the word peace talks is more appropriate. Point this war can no longer be fought. Allied troops from across the country have been mobilized, but the casualties are still heavy. Menelik finally saw that, even if all the soldiers in Abyssinia were gathered together, they would not be able to defeat the attacking Italian army. Point in this case, why continue to fight? Although it is important to ensure Abyssinia's independent status, it cannot be based on the premise that Abyssinia has suffered huge losses. He was more worried about the Sudanese invasion in the Lake Tana area than Italy. Every Abyssinian knew the thoughts of these Sudanese people. Point in fact, putting Haile Selassie under house arrest was for his own good. If he continued to lead troops, Italy might take action on him. Point and his attitude just now showed that Duke Selassie has not given up his hatred. With such an attitude, how could he let him out with peace of mind? Point as for the issue of the army he led that originally belonged to the emperor, that was easy to handle. The 20,000 troops directly under the emperor are currently under the protection of his Heir army. He will conquer this army in the name of the successor emperor in a while point. As long as he conquers this army, no matter whether he is facing the Italians or other princes and nobles, Menelik will be the most powerful person. He can represent Abyssinia and negotiate with the Italians. When it comes to conquering this army, you need to make the necessary preparations. Thinking of this, he asked a confidant beside him, you ready? Get ready. I have already moved the army close to the army, led by Duke Selassie, and another 300 kilograms of gold are also ready. Now that we are ready, let's set off. Menelik then brought the gold to the army, commanded by Duke Selassie. After summoning all the generals, Menelik told the news that the emperor had died in battle, and that Duke Selassie was too sad to be in charge, which caused the generals to panic. Menelik then asked people to take out the gold and let these people make a choice. Except for a few people, everyone knows how to choose. Of course, Menelik's status as emperor's heir played a big role. After taking control of this army, Menelik did not stop and immediately sent a special envoy to Alam to ask for a meeting with General Simon, i.e. Menelik wants peace. Simon, who had just won the battle, looked at the special envoy in front of him and asked with a smile on his face, "Yes, Your Excellency General." As the emperor's heir, His Highness Menelik automatically became the Emperor of Abyssinia after the death of Emperor Johannes. Our Majesty believes that the war between the two countries only brings pain to the people. This is not the behavior of wise men. Therefore, based on a peaceful attitude, we believe that the war between the two countries should be stopped. Looking at the eloquent envoy in front of him, Simone thought for a while and then spoke. "I can promise you, but I ask that your Emperor Menelik must talk to me in person." Faced with Simone's strange request, the special envoy was stunned for a moment before speaking. "As the general wishes, His Majesty the Emperor is willing to come and meet the general for the sake of peace between the two countries." Chapter 149 Treaty of Mera. The battle in Mera city has long ended, and the two armies have broken away from contact. But beside the nameless stream outside Mera city, a large tent was set up. There were only 2 chairs and a wooden table in the big tent, which was very simple. Yes, this is where Simeon is prepared to negotiate. Considering the relationship between the two, placing it here also expresses sincerity. As for the peace talks with the Abyssinians, in fact, when he was still in Rome, His Majesty had already explained that if the Abyssinians were willing to surrender, then it would be acceptable to retain the Abyssinians' political power. At that time, in the city of Rome, the attitudes of the various parties regarding the disposal of the Abyssinians were very different. The military wanted to rule them directly as a colony, while the government, considering the barrenness of the Abyssinian plateau, preferred its a mandate. As for the king who initiated this war, his attitude was the most relaxed. As long as the Abyssinians were willing to become a vassal state of Italy, the war could end. The 3 attitudes of the king, the government, and the military made Simeon feel a little confused about who to listen to, but in the end it was the king who pressured all parties and his opinions prevailed. Therefore, Italy's final solution was to stop fighting against the Abyssinians, as long as they were willing to become Italy's vassal state. In fact, there were other funds, but due to the death of Johannes IV in the war, they could no longer be used. That's why, when Menelik proposed peace on behalf of the Abyssinians, Simone readily agreed. In order to show Italy's victorious attitude, the negotiation location was placed in Mera. "General, the Abyssinians are coming." Simone, who was at the big account, after hearing the report from his subordinates, looked up at several figures on horseback appearing in the distance. Then, "Let's wait for them to come." Simone stood up and casually gave instructions to the people around him. Standing next to him were all those who had made meritorious service in this battle, such as Major General Wagman of the advance team, Major General Pascal, Colonel Zealous and others who had made great achievements in this war, such as star-studded scene. To greet the Abyssinian Emperor, Menelik gave him enough face. When the group of peace talks arrived in front of them, Menelik, who dismounted, immediately stepped forward with a smile and said to Simone, as if he were meeting an old friend, "Hello, General Simeon," completely ignoring the previous fight to the death between the two parties. From this aspect, Menelik is a qualified politician. Compared with Menelik, Major General Wagman, who fought with him in Mera City, was not well educated. Looking at the Abyssinian emperor who had suffered a lot of casualties in the battle with him, his face did not look good at all. Fortunately, it was General Simeon who was negotiating with the Abyssinian emperor. He showed a winner's smile and stepped forward to shake hands with him. "Hello, Emperor Menelik." After the two briefly shook hands, Simeon and Menelik left the others and entered the bigger counterpoint, because the next negotiation needs to be conducted between two people. After the two sat down, Simone spoke. "Your Excellency Menelik, we will not mention the reasons for this war. However, in order to ensure that such a tragedy does not happen in the future, our country needs to station troops in Adua. In addition, in order to reduce unnecessary trouble, Nigeria's diplomacy needs to be entrusted to our country for implementation. In addition, your country needs to open its market to our country. In addition to the fixed customs tax of 5%, no other fees are allowed." In addition, Simeon stated Italy's various requirements for Abyssinia, which basically include tariffs, diplomacy, and consultants. It can be said that it has extended its tentacles to all aspects of Abyssinia. Faced with Simeon's conditions, Menelik said nothing, and he did not offer any rebuttal at all. Because the reason is very simple: Abyssinia cannot be fought anymore, and the elite troops concentrated across the country have suffered heavy losses, so they can only accept Italy's conditions. Fortunately, although Italy has put forward many conditions, the most important right to rule is still left to them. Italy did not intend to rule Abyssinia directly, nor did it want other rights. Menelik waited until Simeon finished talking about the conditions from the Italian side before he spoke. "Our country agrees in principle with your country's conditions. But I would like to ask, on the Sudanese side, do you want to intervene?" Menelik had nothing to do with Italy's request, or he did not have the courage to refuse, but he had his own little thoughts about the Sudanese who were invading his country. Faced with Menelik's temptation, Simone shook his head and replied, "We don't know much about the situation of the Sudanese people. If your country wants to fight back against the invading Sudan, our country will not stop it. Yes, Italy is going to burn bridges. They no longer intend to honor the promises they made to Sudan before. Not to mention the Italians being despicable. There should not be too many countries doing this in this era. In the final analysis, it is still a factor of strength. The strength of the Sudanese is simply not qualified for Italy to take it seriously. Of course, the more important thing is that Italy does not need the Sudanese now, so if it is time to give up, just give up. Wouldn't it be great if this could also give the newly surrendered Abyssinians a little bit of luck?" Simeon's words let Menelik know Italy's attitude, which was a great blessing for Abyssinia. "Thank you for your country's attention to Abyssinia. I have a small gift that I hope your Excellency, Lieutenant General, will not dislike." With that said, Menelik took out an envelope from his pocket and handed it to Simone. "Your Excellency Simone, please don't refuse my personal kindness." Seeing Menelik's move, Simone raised his eyebrows and took it. "I would like to thank you for your kindness." He did not refuse, because if he rejected Menelik's kindness on the spot, although it would not cause the other party to be unhappy, it would still not be a good thing. At worst, he would just hand it over when the time comes. Curious, Simone opened it and saw a check lying quietly inside, starting with 1 and 5 zeros. It was a check from the Bank of England. It seemed that the emperor had spent a lot of money. When Simone calmly accepted the gift, Menelik immediately beamed. "Can we be considered friends now?" "Of course, we are best friends." With the two people having reached an agreement, although there are still some details that need to be discussed later, there is no need for the two of them to continue talking. They are mainly responsible for the general direction. So before long, people waiting on both sides discovered that the two negotiators walked out arm in arm. But that's how politics is. One second the two of them were mortal enemies, and the next second they were like best brothers. This is all damn politics. Although this contract still needs to be signed by Roma, it is basically intact. According to the treaty, Italy obtained diplomatic rights in Abyssinia. In addition, Italy also obtained the authority to garrison troops in Adwa and could deploy no more than 5,000 troops. Then Abyssinia opens its market to Italy and can only charge a 5% tariff. As for other countries, it must charge a tariff of no less than 25%. There is another item, which Menelik took the initiative To add, after Simeon gave up the Sudanese, that is, Italy can recruit soldiers in Abyssinia, but it must not exceed 20,000 people. Of course, there was also a little thought on the part of the emperor. And although Simeon saw through it at a glance, it was also very beneficial to Italy and he happily accepted it. When this treaty is handed over to Rome for signature, the war between the two countries will be over. Of course, Simeon, who had just received the benefits, decided to give the other party something in return. Of course, helping the other party block the invasion of Sudan was also one of the reasons. Emperor Menelik, I have a batch of old ordnance in my army. I wonder if you need it. Chapter 150. Sad. If Italy got the result it wanted, and Abyssinia stopped its losses in time, then the Sudanese who invaded Abyssinia felt like they were in trouble. The Sudanese Caliph Abdullah, who was sidelined, could only grit his teeth in the face of Italy's betrayal and the Abyssinians who were pressed by the entire army. In fact, he should have thought of it after Italy signed the peace treaty with Abyssinia, because the Italians did not inform him of this situation at all. By the time he got the news, the Abyssinian army had already arrived. In Azizo on the north shore of Lake Tana, the Sultan Caliph looked extremely bad. I actually believed the instigation of the pagans. It was greed that obscured my eyes. That's right. If Abdullah hadn't had ambitions for Abyssinian territory, how could he have attacked Abyssinia with Italy? But now Italy had achieved its goal, leaving the Sudanese alone to face the Abyssinian counterattack. However, although he was facing the Abyssinians alone, Abdullah still had confidence. What gave him confidence was the 90,000 troops at his disposal. Because he knew that the Abyssinians had suffered heavy losses in previous battles with the Italians, with 50 to 60,000 casualties. Now, the Abyssinians would not have a force superior to their own. Abdullah was right as he expected. Menelik, who currently leads the army to Gondar, has only more than 80,000 people. However, although he has fewer numbers, he has weapons and even secret equipment supported by Italy. It was also his check of £100,000 that played a role in giving him this secret weapon. Menelik had seen this kind of equipment, which was the proof that he was confident in overcoming the Sudan. It seems that a war between the two countries is inevitable. Now let us put aside the fighting between the two African countries and focus on Europe. The news of Abyssinia's surrender cheered the city of Rome. Although many people did not even know where Abyssinia was, it did not prevent them from holding victory parades. The motherland has won a victory and the Italian colonies have greatly increased. How can we not make people happy? As for the cheering parade of the Italians, Britain and France, as old colonial countries, were a little bit playful about this. French newspapers described the war in Italy as a story about a man who was going crazy with hunger, picked up a piece of bread, and stood in the street to show it off. He had never seen anything in the world. The British Times reported that we do not want to comment too much on the colonial war in Italy. However, it spent nearly £8 million to mobilize a large number of troops. It is not known how Italy plans to earn back this money from Baron Abyssinia. Well, the British report is more objective after all, while the French report is full of ridicule. Well, let's ignore the French attitude. The British are very right about one thing. This time Italy cost a little too much. For this reason, Prime Minister Depretis found Carlo worriedly. Your Majesty, now that the war is over, the troops should be withdrawn. Seeing that the Prime Minister was unwilling to wait for even a moment, Carlo put down his inner joy and asked curiously, "What's wrong? Look at this bill. It's all the cost of this war." Watching the Prime Minister hand a list to him, Carlo looked at it curiously. Carlo went straight to the end of the various expenses listed above. There were still words of 21.93 million lire left on it. It was so eye-catching that he was stunned. How come there is only so much left? It was rare that Carlo actually cared about the problem of too much spending. The Prime Minister said with an ugly face. This does not include the cost of withdrawing the troops. If it is added, then I will have 10 million lire left, and I will be satisfied. Well, the Prime Minister's words made Carlo look embarrassed. This was all because he was too generous this time, but he didn't dare not be generous when fighting the Abyssinians. The report from Simeon made Carlo very happy that he did not follow the military's advice. If only 10,000 people were sent, it would be like sending a sheep into the tiger's mouth. You must know that according to Simone's report, the Italian army lost more than 4,000 people in this war against Abyssinia. Although it also caused the loss of 50,000 to 60,000 Abyssinians, this also proved that this East African feudalism the country is brave and good at fighting. Point of course, for Carlo, being able to defeat the Abyssinians would be worth the expense. At least he avoided making Italy the laughingstock of Europe, which would have caused huge damage to the Italian people's self-confidence, which money cannot buy. It's just that spending a lot of money is very satisfying, but after that, my heart aches a little bit. Therefore, when faced with the Prime Minister's questioning, Carlo could only make decisions about him. Now let me consider the issue of troop withdrawal. Your Majesty can no longer think about it. Now Simeon's army needs to consume a lot of supplies every day, which is all money. Besides, we have no money. If the army does not withdraw, Your Excellency Tegela will go crazy. Facing the Prime Minister's words, Carlo looked at him in surprise. That's impossible. How is it impossible? Finance Minister Tegela told me yesterday that the money in the national treasury has been reduced to the warning level. If there are still large expenditures, then we can only continue to borrow foreign debt. At present, our country has continued to lose money in the securities market. We have borrowed several foreign debts and have already consumed enough investors' confidence. If we continue to borrow more, we may become the next Spain. The Prime Minister's words shocked Carlo. Spain is not a good player in the securities market. The country's foreign debt is like buying a lottery ticket, which is frightening. Carlo certainly does not want to see Italy become like Spain, a country burdened with huge foreign debt. At this time Carlo couldn't help but ask, how much foreign debt do we currently borrow? Before this, Carlo didn't know much about Italy's foreign debt, but since the Prime Minister said so, he needed to know what he said. In response to Carlo's query, the Prime Minister replied, currently, the total foreign debt borrowed by our country is 4.129 billion lire of foreign debt. In the past 3 years, we need to repay 873 million lire of principal and interest foreign debt. Within 5 years, we need to repay 1.571 billion lire of foreign debt. Most of the remaining foreign debt needs to be paid off within 10 years, so our country is under great financial pressure and must save all expenses as much as possible. Facing the Prime Minister's words, Carlo was shocked. He did not expect Italy to bear so much foreign debt. This requires 3 years of fiscal revenue to fill. Faced with this financial situation, what Carlo could say was that he could only speak to the Prime Minister. Okay, I will ask the troops to withdraw as soon as possible after stabilizing the local situation. After the satisfied Prime Minister left, Carlo called for an attendant. Ask Mr. Alleged to come over and tell me I'm looking for him, as you command, Your Majesty. After Carlo learned about the pressure on government finances, he planned to increase investment in industry. Only industry could save Italy's finances. Electrification is the focus of this investment. Please subscribe for 2 chapters. The chapter names are my mood. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.